Clash by Night. It gets dark out on the rim. Strange planets and stranger people can be found on the edge of the Empire, where habitable worlds are few and civilization grows thin. Beyond the rim lies uncharted darkness, where no stars shine and no ships go. It's easy to get lost out there, far away from everything. Star cruisers patrol up to the rim, but there are never enough ships to cover the vast areas of open space. The Empire is growing too large, too cumbersome, though no one will admit it, or at least no one who matters. Every year more worlds are brought into the Empire, and the frontiers press hungrily outward. But not on the rim. The Empire stops cold there, dwarfed by the unplumbable depths of the dark void. It gets dark out there. Ships disappear sometimes and are never seen again. No one knows why. The colonized worlds make themselves as self-sufficient as they can and turn their eyes away from the endless dark. Crime flourishes on the rim, unthinkable distances from the hub of the Empire's strict laws. Some transgressions as old as humanity, others newly birthed by the Empire's growing sciences. For the moment, the Empire star cruisers still keep a lid on things, dropping unannounced out of hyperspace to enforce the law with brutal efficiency. But they can't be everywhere. Strange forces are at work on the rim, patient and terrible, and all it will take to set them off is a simple clash between two starships off the backwater planet of Virimond. In high orbit around Virimond, the pirate ship Shard sailed silently through the long night, hiding itself from unfriendly eyes. Not a big ship, the Shard, built more for speed than endurance, and passed from hand to hand through a dozen owners and commands. Now she carried clone-leggers and body banks, and every man's hand was turned against her. Deep in the bowels of the ship, Hazel Dark, pirate, clone-legger, and bon vivant, strode scowling through the dimly lit steel corridors and wished she was somewhere else. Anywhere else. The Shard wasn't a luxurious craft at the best of times, but with most of the ship's power diverted to maintaining the body banks, the old scud seemed even gloomier than usual, which took some doing. Hazel Dark, last owner of a once noble name, came to the locked door that led to the cargo bay, and stood waiting impatiently for the door's sensors to recognize her. Her mood was bad, bordering on foul, and had been ever since they dropped out of hyperspace 6 hours ago to take up orbit around Virimond. 6 hours of waiting for some word from their contacts down below. Something was wrong. They couldn't afford to stay much longer, but they couldn't leave either. So they waited. Hazel wasn't expecting any trouble from the planet's security people. The Shard might be old, but she had state-of-the-art cloaking devices, more than enough to fool anything the peasants had on Virimond. Not that there was much the planet could do, even if it knew the pirates were there. Virimond was a low-tech agricultural world, with more livestock than people. Its only contact with the Empire was a monthly cargo transporter and an occasional patrolling star cruiser, neither of which was expected for some weeks. Hazel glared at the closed door before her and kicked the frame hard. The door hissed open, and she stepped through into the freezing cold of the cargo bay. The door locked itself behind her. A pearly haze misted the air and burned in her lungs. She shuddered quickly and turned up the heating elements in her uniform. The body banks needed the cold at a specific temperature to preserve and maintain their cargo of human tissues for cloning. Hazel looked quickly about her, and then accessed her comm implant.
Hannah, this is Hazel. Acknowledge.
I hear you, Hazel,
said the ship's AI.
What can I do for you?
Edit the signals from the cargo bay's security sensor so it appears I'm not here.
The artificial intelligence didn't have human emotions, but it liked to pretend.
Now, Hazel, you know you're not supposed to be in there. You'll get us both into trouble.
Do it anyway, or I'll tell the captain about your personal video collection of his private moments.
I wouldn't have shown you those if I'd known you were going to use them to blackmail me. They're a perfectly innocent collection after all.
Computer!
All right. I'm editing the sensors. Happy now?
Close as I'll get. And Hannah, if I ever catch you snooping on my private moments, I'll perform a lobotomy on your main systems with a shrapnel grenade. Got it?
Hannah sniffed once and broke off contact. Hazel smiled briefly. All the AIs the captain could have chosen, and he had to buy a peeping Tom. Somehow that was typical of the Shard and its luck. She looked about her at the long rows of body banks, huge and blocky, their dull metal sides smeared with frost and caked with ice. Ugly things for an ugly business. The AI was quite right. She had no business in the cargo bay, and no authority either. Not that she gave a damn. Hazel Dark had a long history of not giving a damn, not to mention doing whatever she happened to feel was necessary, and to hell with the consequences. Which was at least partly why she'd ended up an outlaw and a pirate. She moved slowly toward the nearest body bank, drawn by a curious mixture of revulsion and fascination. She'd had no illusions about what she was getting into when she'd signed on board the Shard as a clone-legger, but somehow it was different up close. The body banks were a source of life and longevity, but the spotless cargo bay still seemed to reek of death. Most of the lights were out, conserving energy. Never knew when you might need the extra power to make a run for it. Clone-leggers were not popular, either with the authorities or those who had a need for their services. Hazel walked slowly down the central aisle between the body banks. Visions of hearts and lungs and kidneys burned brightly in her mind's eye, pulsing with fresh crimson blood. She was sure they didn't actually look like that, preserved in the icy cold of the machines, but that was how she thought of them. Her fellow clone-leggers just referred to them as the merchandise, as casual as any butcher in a slaughterhouse. She stopped and looked around her, surrounded by hundreds upon hundreds of human organs and tissues, enough to fill a dozen battlegrounds, and every one of them worthless. Contaminated beyond saving by a smuggled virus. That was what you got for making enemies in the clone-legging business. Not too long before, the captain had come out ahead in a business deal with the Boneyard Boys through his usual mixture of high risk-taking and low cunning. Contracts the Shard had lusted after for years had fallen into their hands as though by magic. Hazel smiled grimly. They should have known better. Clone-legging was a cutthroat business. Sometimes, literally. Clone-legging was illegal, a crime punishable by death, but that did nothing to slow down the flood of people ready and willing to make a living out of death. Officially, the use of cloned human tissues for transplanting was only allowed to the highest of the high, those with breeding and position, and a not too small fortune. Couldn't have the lower orders leading long and healthy lives. There were far too many of them as it was, even with the newly colonized worlds opening up vast new territories for settling. Besides, it might give the lower orders ideas above their station. But unofficially, if you had enough money and knew the right, or more strictly speaking, wrong people, you could get whatever part of you was failing replaced, either by cloning your own tissues or by illegally obtained organs from body banks. There was never any risk of rejection with a person's own cloned tissues, but surprisingly often the original organs turned out to have built-in defects, or there were other problems that made direct cloning impossible. That was when the body snatchers came into their own. And then no one was safe, living or dead. Most planets cremated their dead by order of the Empress to ensure that donor organs would only be available to the right sort of people. But backwater planets often cultivated illegal secret graveyards and mausoleums. Never knew when the crops might fail or business turn bad, and you might need a little cash in the bank, so to speak. So the clone-leggers made the rounds, and everyone made a little money. The clone-leggers made a lot. Demand was high. All they had to do was maintain a full stock list and wait for someone to come knocking tentatively at their door. Only, it isn't always that simple. Cloning is a delicate business, with all sorts of things that can go wrong. Cloning wears out an organ fast, and then it has to be replaced in stock. The body banks have a voracious appetite, and the hidden cemeteries are few and far between, often with exclusive contracts to one particular set of clone-leggers. So sometimes the body snatchers go out in disguise to walk among the living, looking for those who won't be missed too much. A shame, of course, but you can't make an omelet, and all that. When Hazel joined the Shard's crew 4 planets back, the captain had assured her they were grave robbers only. Except when things got really bad. Get in quick, dig up enough merchandise to fill the body banks, and then get the hell out of there before someone sold them out for an Empire reward. There's always someone. Only this time, it had all gone wrong. The Boneyard boys had got in first and contaminated the merchandise with a really vicious virus that hadn't shown up on any of the usual tests. Now every organ they had was worthless, and they had contracts to fill with people who weren't known for their patience or understanding. So Captain Marquis had gone cap in hand to the Blood Runners out in the Obia systems and begged a favor. Hazel still shuddered when she thought of what she and the rest of the crew had had to promise in return for the information the Blood Runners provided. Nothing could be allowed to go wrong with this deal. There were worse things than death. So the Blood Runners had put them in touch with people on Virimond, out on the Rim, and the Shard had come to play the old game one more time. One last throw of the dice. Hazel wondered, not for the first time, how she'd come to this. It wasn't exactly what she'd had in mind for herself when she left her home planet 10 minutes ahead of a restraining order and a lengthy stay in jail in search of excitement and adventure. Clone-leggers were the lowest of the low, the scum of the Empire. Even a beggar with leprosy would pause to spit on a clone-legger. People who walked in certain high circles liked to boast of their personal clone-leggers, as one might an attack beast trained for the arenas, but no one had a good word for them in open society. They were pariahs, outcasts, untouchables for daring to traffic in the trade that no one wanted to admit existed. Hazel sighed tiredly. She'd leave the Shard in a moment if she had anywhere to go. Hazel Dark, 23 years old, tall, lively, muscular, with a sharp, pointed face and a mane of long, ratty red hair, green eyes that missed nothing, and a smile so quick people often missed it if they weren't looking for it. She'd worked in one dirty job after another since leaving home, and it showed in the wariness of her stance and the naked suspicion in her scowl. She'd been a mercenary on Loki, a bodyguard on Golgotha, and most recently part of the security forces on Brahmin 2, which was where Captain Marquis found her, running for her life. The superior officer had decided his rank entitled him to certain rights to her body, and not for cloning either. Hazel Dark had disagreed. She'd decided a long time ago that she wasn't giving away anything she could sell. It came to blows and ended in tears, and Hazel went on the run again with the bastard's blood still dripping from her knife. At the time, a little discreet clone-legging had seemed like a definite career advancement. Low profile, low risk, the only hard work a little digging. Perfect. Especially with so many people hot on her trail. Just lately it seemed there was always someone looking for her with bad intentions. It was all her own fault, she knew that. She'd always had a tendency to wander into illegal deals in search of fast money, and only afterward discover what she'd let herself in for. But even though she'd done a lot of things in her time that she wasn't too proud of, kidnapping people and butchering them in cold blood for their organs had to be a new low, even for her. She didn't know if she could do it. She had a feeling it might be a matter of principle, something she wasn't exactly familiar with, but everyone draws the line somewhere. She ran through the options open to her. It didn't take long. She couldn't just announce her newfound integrity to her fellow crew members, not unless she wanted to see the inside of a body bank the hard way. She could always jump ship, ride one of the escape pods down to the planet below, and lose herself in the crowds, but Virimond was a primitive place by all accounts, based around hard work and damn all luxuries. Not a good place to be stranded on the run, especially when there are people looking for you on both sides of the law. Hazel Dark looked around her at the waiting body banks and shuddered, not entirely from the cold.
What am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do?
Lights flared around her as the ship's alarms went crazy. Hazel winced away from the sudden blare of sound, her hand dropping automatically to the gun at her side. Her first thought was a hull breach, but she quickly realized that if there'd been an explosive decompression in any part of the ship, she'd have felt its effects long before the sirens went off. She accessed the emergency channel through her comm implant, and a babble of voices filled her head. It only took her a moment to pick out the phrase, battle stations, and then she was off and running. Someone had pierced the Shard's cloaking device, and that was supposed to be impossible for anything less than an Imperial starcruiser. And if the Empire had found them, there was a very real danger that Hazel Dark's career as a clone-legger was over before it had even begun.
Just my luck,
thought Hazel bitterly as she ran out of the cargo bay and headed for the bridge.
Just my luck to get picked up for one of the few crimes I haven't actually committed. Hannah, talk to me. How deep are we in it?
I'm afraid you couldn't get much deeper without crouching,
the AI said calmly through her implant.
An Imperial starcruiser has dropped out of hyperspace and taken up orbit around Viramond. Their sensors brushed aside our cloaking devices in well under a second, and it didn't take them much longer to issue a challenge. I'm currently lying through my electronic teeth, but there's a limit to how long I can hope to bluff them, and I have a strong suspicion it isn't going to be anywhere near long enough for us to raise enough power to escape into hyperspace.
Couldn't we make a run for it in normal space?
This is an Imperial starcruiser we're discussing, Hazel. They don't come much more powerful than this. They'd blast us into tiny glowing fragments before we even left orbit.
We've got shields.
They've got 250 disruptor cannon and power to burn.
Can we fight them?
If you really want to annoy them.
Damn it, there must be something we can do. You're the one with the immense intellect. Think of something.
You could always surrender.
Hazel would have laughed sarcastically, but she was too short of breath. She pounded down the steel corridor, head aching from the clamor of the alarm siren, and finally burst onto the bridge and threw herself into her fire control seat. Whatever was going on, she was sure she'd feel a damn sight more secure plugged into the Shard's 2 disruptor cannon. Theoretically, the AI was far more capable of aiming and firing the ship's disruptors, but what one AI could plan, another could anticipate and match. Human unpredictability provided an edge no AI could deal with, which is why there were always human gunners on every ship. Hazel meshed her mind with the computers through her implant and spread out through the fire systems, running quickly through the warm-up routines. Computer displays sprang up all around her, and a steady stream of information flowed through her thoughts. Hazel got her first real look at the starcruiser, and her heart sank. The Empire ship was 1,000 times bigger, dwarfing the Shard like a minnow next to a whale. The AI ran quickly through a list of the Imperial craft's capabilities, and Hazel's heart sank even further. Disruptor cannon, force shields, assault torpedoes. The Shard wouldn't stand a chance. But then, she'd always known that. The only thing big enough to take on a starcruiser was another starcruiser. Hazel swallowed hard and let her thoughts move cautiously through the 2 fire turrets. The cannon stirred restlessly at her touch, picking out targets of opportunity on the Imperial ship. Hazel's breathing had almost slowed to normal, but her anger took it away again as she studied the starcruiser. What the hell was it doing here? There wasn't one due for weeks officially. It couldn't have come looking for the Shard. A handful of clone-leggers on a pirate ship weren't that important. Which was all very fine and logical, but the Imperial ship was still there, large as life and twice as deadly, its ranked cannon no doubt locked on the pirate ship and ready to fire at a moment's notice. Hazel scowled fiercely. They couldn't run, they couldn't fight, and they didn't dare surrender. Maybe they could make a deal, if they could think of something to bargain with. Her mind worked frantically, but came up with nothing. Unless Captain Marquis had a whole pack of aces up his sleeve, the Empire ship had them cold. She looked across the bridge at the captain. Terence Marquis was in his late 40s, large and solid and reliable. He'd been a pirate all his adult life and loved every illegal moment of it. He dressed like a gaudy, if somewhat dated dandy, all flashing silks and clashing colors, and affected an aristocratic accent he had no right to. At the moment, he was scowling at his displays and growling a series of calm, quiet orders. Slightly reassured that at least one person on the bridge wasn't panicking, Hazel let her eyes drift round the cramped confines of the command area. Anything was better than looking at the Empire ship. The bridge of the Shard was a mess. Half the lights weren't working at any given time because bulbs were expensive and they never carried enough spares, and the limited low-ceilinged space was crammed with workstations, computer displays, and terminals, never mind the sensor panels and fire control station. Officially, there was room for 7 crew on the bridge, including the captain, but as usual there were only 4, including the captain and Hazel. The Shard operated on a bare minimum crew, with everyone holding down as many jobs as they could handle. Half the systems weren't working, but you learned to put up with that as long as the essentials were maintained. Repairs were hideously expensive, especially at Stardocks. Clone-legging could provide a very comfortable living if you were in the right place at the right time and kept up a good stock, but it was a crowded field these days, and small independent ships like the Shard were being forced out. Marquis had been relying on the Virimond run to restock the body banks and repair his fortunes and his ship. And then he made an enemy of the Boneyard boys, and everything went to hell in a hurry. A thought struck Hazel, and she looked back at Marquis.
Captain, how about if we just dump everything? Throw the merchandise and body banks out the airlock and let it all burn up, falling through Virimond's atmosphere. No evidence, no proof.
Nice idea. And if that ship hadn't been a star cruiser, we might have got away with it,
said Marquis.
But with the kind of sensors they've got, they could identify every organ and tissue sample independently, and read the maker's name on the body banks. Their census records would make damning evidence. So, we can't dump it, and we can't afford to be caught with it. Doesn't leave much room for maneuvering, does it?
He smiled briefly.
I suppose we could always eat the merchandise. How's your appetite, Hazel?
Not as good as it was a moment ago. Basically, what you're saying is we're screwed if we do and screwed if we don't. I suppose surrender is out of the question.
Marquis' smile came and went again.
There's enough evidence on this ship to hang us all, slowly.
So what are we going to do?
The one thing they won't expect. We'll fight. Who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky.
And if we don't?
Then at least we'll die quickly. Are the guns ready?
Ready as they'll ever be. They haven't been checked, let alone fired, in ages.
Hazel glared at the massive ship on the screens before her. Tears of anger and frustration burned in her eyes, but she wouldn't give in to them. Her luck had just turned bad one time too many, that was all. She pounded a fist on the arm of her chair.
What the hell is an Empire ship doing here, anyway? We only made the decision to come here 12 hours ago. They couldn't have known about us.
She didn't see Marquis shrug, but she could hear it in his voice.
A lot can happen in 12 hours, especially when you've got enemies. Any number of people could have found out where we were heading, and then sold the information to the Empire.
But who the hell would send a whole bloody star cruiser after small fry like us?
Good question. Wish I had a good answer for you. Could be the Boneyard boys, calling in an old favor to put the finishing touch to our destruction. It doesn't matter. Now, suck it in, and stand ready with your disruptors. Hannah is currently telling the Empire ship that we're an ambulance craft on a mercy mission to a plague outbreak. She's feeding them all kinds of convincing details, but I don't think they're buying it. Certainly they aren't going to buy it long enough for our engines to power up for a jump into hyperspace.
Hazel's mouth was suddenly dry.
Captain, our 2 guns aren't worth spit against all theirs. There must be something else we can try.
Sorry, Hazel. Nothing springs to mind. You know what they say. If you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined.
Hazel waited, but Marquis had nothing more to say. She concentrated on her fire controls. Both the Shard and the Star Cruiser had force screens that could withstand a hell of a lot of punishment, but they also used up a hell of a lot of energy, and the Shard's shields would go down long before the Imperial ships did. It came to Hazel then that she was going to die out in the empty spaces of the rim, far from home and family and honor, just as she'd always known she would. On the Imperial Star Cruiser Darkwind, Captain John Silence sat at ease in his command chair, looking out over his efficiently murmuring bridge. Every man at his station, every system running smoothly, just as it should be. The small craft on the main view screen seemed surprisingly insignificant to be taking up so much of his time and attention. Still, nothing that small was going to give him any trouble, and the prize money its capture would bring would be a welcome bonus. At least that way something good might come of this mission. He tried to push the thought aside, but it persisted. He had better things to do than waste time hunting down some poor bastard who probably didn't even know he'd been outlawed yet. But man proposes, and the Empress disposes. She said go, and you went. If you liked having your head still attached to your body. He looked at the starship on the main view screen again, and frowned slightly. Probably just a pirate ship involved in something dubious. But what was it doing here at the same time as the Darkwind? Could it have come to try and save the Deathstalker? Owen Deathstalker, Lord of Virimond, holder of a proud name and title, condemned to death by the Empress's word. She hadn't said why, and Silence hadn't asked. One didn't. But Silence had quietly checked the files anyway, just in case there was something there he ought to know. If there was, he missed it. Owen Deathstalker might be descended from a famous warrior clan, but in his case the blood seemed to be running thin. His people ran Virimond efficiently enough, but the man himself was just an amateur historian, wrote long books on obscure subjects that no one ever read. Looking back was unofficially discouraged. There were too many subjects the Empire preferred its people to forget. Presumably, the Deathstalker had stumbled across something he shouldn't have. Whatever it was, Owen Deathstalker wouldn't be writing a book about it this time. He was outlawed, a non-person with a price on his head. Literally. The Empress liked proof of her kills. Silence shrugged and sat back in his command chair. A tall, lean man in his 40s, with a thickening waistline and a receding hairline he tried not to be touchy about. He sat in the command chair with a quiet dignity, as though he belonged there. He'd served the Empire to the best of his ability all his adult life, and if sometimes he found himself on a mission he had no stomach for, well, that was the Empire for you, under Her Imperial Majesty Lionstone the 14th, also known as the Iron Bitch. Silence stopped that thought short. It wasn't wise to let one's thoughts run free in some directions. You never knew when an Esper might be listening. He concentrated on the pirate ship before him. Small craft, built more for speed than action. No threat to a star cruiser. But she shouldn't have been here, not just now. Silence looked across at his comm officer. Do we have an identification on her yet?
Not yet, Captain. Their AI is talking our ears off, but not actually saying much. It's trying to feed us some nonsense about being a medical ship on a mercy mission, but it's the wrong kind of craft for that, and it doesn't have the proper identification codes. Odds are they're just trying to keep us occupied while they power up for a hyperjump. Do we stop them, Captain, or let them go?
We stop them,
said a calm, cold voice, and Silence nodded to Investigator Frost as she came to stand beside him. Frost was in her late 20s, tall and lively muscular, with a gun on her hip and a long sword hanging down her back. Even standing still, she looked competent and extremely dangerous, like a predator in a world of prey. Dark eyes burned coldly in a pale, controlled face, framed by auburn hair cropped close to the skull. You couldn't call her pretty, but there was a daunting glamour to her, attractive and intimidating at the same moment. Investigators were trained from childhood to be loyal, efficient, and deadly. Their job was to study newly discovered alien species and determine how much of a threat they might prove to the Empire. Depending on those findings, the aliens would then be either enslaved or exterminated. There was no third option. Investigators were also used as security chiefs, bodyguards, and assassins. They were cold, calculating killing machines, and they were either good at their job or dead. Silence and Frost had worked together on several missions and understood each other, which was as close to friendship as you could get with an investigator.
"There's no hurry," said Silence. "A ship that small takes forever to power up. They're not going anywhere yet."
I don't like it.
Frost said flatly.
An unexpected ship in orbit waiting for us. I don't believe in coincidence. Someone has alerted our target that he's been outlawed. That ship is either here to protect him or carry him away. Either way, our orders are quite specific. Under no circumstances is the target to be allowed to escape.
Silence nodded. The outlaw was only ever referred to as the target in public. It wouldn't do for the lower orders to know that a lord had been outlawed, especially one with such a famous name. The name Deathstalker could still command respect and possibly allies in certain quarters, irrespective of the Empress's wishes or orders, which was why an entire star cruiser had been sent to see that the Deathstalker's outlawing went smoothly. He was to be captured and executed before word could get out to potential friends. Only it seemed someone had beaten them to it.
The ship could have been sent to occupy our attention while the target is helped to escape. We can't afford to waste time on it. With your permission, I'll form a boarding party and get some answers in person.
"Not so fast, investigator. Let's do this by the book. As for Fortuna?"
Yes, Captain.
The Darkwind's Esper, Thomas Fortuna, stepped forward to stand on the captain's other side, opposite the investigator. He was short, dumpy, and his uniform looked as though he'd inherited it from someone larger. His shaven head glistened brightly.
"I want a full scan on that ship. See what you can pick up."
Yes, Captain.
Fortuna's mind leapt up and out, and his face relaxed completely, losing all trace of life and personality. Then his face twisted, and he was back again, shaking his head disgustedly.
That ship is full of death and the memory of pain. So many traces I can't even identify the sources, except to say they're all human and all dead. There are body banks on that ship, Captain, brimming over with the residues of suffering. They're clone leggers.
"Nothing to do with the target? You're sure?"
As far as I can be, Captain.
That settles it, then. We can't waste time over a handful of body snatchers. Blow the ship to pieces. The universe will smell better once they're gone.
"Couldn't agree more. Go ahead, investigator. Enjoy yourself."
The pirate ship Shard rocked as the Darkwind opened fire on her. Hannah got the force screens up in time, deflecting the raging energy from the disruptor cannon, but it was all the AI could do to maintain them under the constant barrage from the Empire ship. Hazel Dark fired back, but her two cannon made no impression on the Darkwind's superior shields. Lights went out all over the Shard as the AI drained more and more energy from the ship's systems to maintain the force screens. The power accumulated for a hyperjump was used up in seconds, and one by one the body banks shut down, their fragile contents left to warm and rot. The Shard jerked this way and that, like a fish on a hook, running through every evasive maneuver in the AI's databanks, but the Darkwind stayed with them, the disruptor cannon firing one after another to maintain a constant pressure. Hazel shuddered at her fire controls, feeling every hammering blow on the Shard's shields through her mental link to the computers. She pounded impatiently on the arms of her chair as she waited the 3 agonizing minutes it took for her antiquated disruptor cannon to power up between shots. The Darkwind didn't have that problem. She fired her disruptors in overlapping waves so that each cannon had time to recharge before it had to fire again. The Empire ship also had far greater resources of power to draw on. The Shard didn't stand a chance, and everyone knew it. Light dimmed on the Shard's bridge as fires broke out in a dozen places. Smoke formed faster than the extractor fans could deal with it. Hazel coughed raggedly as she tried to concentrate on the fire controls. The station next to hers exploded. the man sitting there suddenly engulfed in flames. He screamed shrilly till the air in his lungs burned up. The AI was gabbling incoherently in Hazel's ears, its voice breaking up as it struggled to hold the disintegrating ship together. She spun round in her seat and glared across the smoke-filled bridge at Captain Marquis.
Surrender, damn it! They're tearing us apart!
No point. They must know we're clone-leggers. They're not interested in our surrender. We can't fight, we can't run, and we haven't a hope in hell of raising enough power to go hyper. That only leaves one option. I'm going to use Loverboy on their shields and then ram the bastards. If I'm going down, I'm taking them with me.
Hazel's fire control exploded, throwing her out and across the bridge. She landed hard, driving the breath from her lungs, her uniform blackened and scorched. She was badly burned, but for the moment, shock smothered most of the pain. She rolled slowly onto her side, fighting to stay conscious. She could hear Marquis giving orders in a calm, reasonable voice.
Loverboy.
Hazel clung to the thought as she forced herself up onto her knees. Loverboy was an experimental program the captain had acquired on Brahmin 2. It was called Loverboy because love laughs at locksmiths, and because the program was designed to give another ship's security systems a real good screwing. The captain was going to use Loverboy to get the Dark One to drop her force shields and then ram her. The shard would hit like a single huge torpedo, and that would be the end of the Darkwind. And the shard. Hazel lurched to her feet, grabbed the nearest station to steady herself, and glared through the smoke and flames at Captain Marquis.
Are you crazy? We'll all be killed!
He didn't answer her. His gaze was fixed on his computer displays, and he was laughing. Hazel looked wildly round for help, only to find she and Marquis were the only living crew left on the bridge. The rest were dead at their stations. Hazel staggered away from the bridge, stumbling through the smoke and wreckage. If she was quick, she could still get to an escape pod before the two ships hit. And if she was really lucky, the escape pod would still be working. The corridor lurched back and forth as Hazel forced herself into a run. Adrenaline was putting strength back into her legs, but she knew that wouldn't last long. Solid steel creaked and groaned around her as the ship began to break up. Marquis had to be directing most of the shard's remaining power into the force shields, but some of the punishment was getting through anyway. The lights were going out, one by one. Hazel tried to contact Hannah through her comm implant, but the AI was still talking gibberish, mumbling to itself in a querulous voice. Hazel rounded a corner and then stumbled to a halt. One of the bulkheads had been blown inward, blocking the corridor completely. Spikes of jagged metal thrust out in all directions, some of it still glowing cherry red from the heat of the recent explosion. Hazel took the opportunity to get her breath back and studied the situation as calmly as she could. Panicking or screaming with rage might feel good, but it wouldn't get her anywhere. The first real pain from her burns was beginning to gnaw at her, but she forced the awareness down to a level she could deal with. She grabbed hold of a few spikes that were only uncomfortably warm and tried to shift the steel mass, but it didn't budge an inch. She bit her lower lip, scowling. This was the only way to the escape pods. She had to get through. Her hand fell to the gun on her hip. Using an energy weapon in a confined space was always dangerous, but nowhere near as dangerous as being trapped here when the two ships hit. She drew her disruptor, set it to maximum dispersal, and fired before she could think better of it. The raging energy beam punched a hole clean through the steel barrier, leaving a tunnel that stretched away into the metal for as far as she could see. It wasn't much of a tunnel, 3 feet in diameter at most, but it would have to do. She just hoped it would have an opening at the other end. The sides of the hole glowed red with a sullen heat, and Hazel knew she couldn't afford to touch them. But she was going to have to crawl through the tunnel on all fours, and that meant contact with her hands and knees. Her uniform would protect her knees, for a while anyway, but she'd have to do something to protect her bare hands. She put away her gun, drew her backup knife from her boot, and cut away one of her sleeves. She cut the cloth in 2 again, put away her knife, and wrapped the cloth around her hands. She looked again at the red-hot sides of the tunnel before her and winced. This was going to be really unpleasant. She swallowed hard and clambered quickly into the opening before she could change her mind. The heat hit her from all directions, and she could feel the skin of her face tightening and smarting. Sweat poured off her, evaporating in seconds. She crawled on through the steel tunnel, and the heat seared her hands and knees, even through the protecting cloth. She hurried as much as she could, but it was a narrow space with no room to maneuver. Her back brushed against the tunnel roof now and again, and she had to grit her teeth against the heat and pain. The cloth pad she'd made for her hands started to smoke. Her eyes narrowed to watering slits against the fiery air, and her lungs felt scorched with every breath. The metal creaked and groaned around her, as though it might collapse at any moment. Hazel's heart hammered in her chest, and a blind, unreasoning fear gnawed at her self-control till she wanted to scream. But she didn't. Screaming wouldn't help. She forced herself on through the heat, shuffling forward on hands and knees that seemed to be one blazing mass of pain. She could smell her flesh burning. Tears ran down her face, as much from frustration as pain, evaporating almost at once. And then she was out of the tunnel, and the heat fell away from her like a burning blanket. She'd made her way through the obstruction. She was back in the open corridor, and the cool air was like a blessing. She lurched to her feet, gritting her teeth at the pain in her hands and knees and back till her jaw ached. Her leggings had burnt right through, and the blackened cloths around her hands fell apart as she tried to unwrap them. She stumbled on, not daring to look at her hands, trying to find the strength to hurry. She had no idea of how much time she had left. Her struggle in the steel tunnel had seemed to last forever. Most of the lights were out now, and the ship was dark and echoing. The smell of smoke was heavy in the air. She forced herself on, having to guess the right way as often as not. But finally she came to the escape pods, sitting calmly in their racks as though they had all the time in the world. Hazel just stood and stared numbly at them for a long moment. All her strength had gone into getting her here, and she seemed to have none left to do anything else. A series of explosions shook the ship, jarring her back to her senses. She stumbled over to the nearest pod and hit the activation button with her blackened fist. The door swung open maddeningly slowly, and the interior of the pod lit up as its systems came online. Hazel clambered inside and sank into the waiting crash webbing with something like relief. It felt so good to be off her feet at last. The door hissed shut behind her, and she worked her jaw to pop her ears as the air pressure changed. The pod's cabin was barely a dozen feet long, with just enough room for 2 passengers. It occurred to Hazel that it was not unlike lying in a coffin, and the thought amused her briefly. A fitting fate for a would-be grave robber. She pushed the thought aside and painfully forced her blistered and stiffened fingers through the series of commands that would eject the pod from the shard. She braced herself for the impact, and only slowly realized that nothing was happening. She ran through the launch sequence again, crying out at the pain in her hands, but still there was no response. Panic flared up in her, and the cramped confines of the escape pod were suddenly unbearably claustrophobic. She started to get up out of the crash webbing, and only stopped herself with an effort of will. There was no point in leaving the pod. The shard was a death ship now. Her only hope for survival was to make the pod work. The panic began to die away as she made herself study the problem logically. There was nothing wrong with the pod itself, or it would have showed up on the control panels, which meant the problem lay outside, in the launching systems controlled by the ship's AI, Hannah. Hazel accessed the AI through her comm implant, but there was only silence. The lack of response was somehow more worrying than the previous gibberish. Hazel called again. There was someone listening. She could feel it. When the answer finally came, it was like a whisper at midnight, as though the sound was traveling from somewhere impossibly far away.
Hazel? Everything feels wrong. Parts of me are missing, and I can't find them. I can't think properly. There are shadows in my memories, running loose like rats in a barn. Help me, Hazel. Stop them. Please, stop them.
It's so cold in here. And I'm afraid.
Hannah! Listen to me, Hannah. I'm stuck in Escape Pod 7. I need you to run through the launch sequence for me. Can you hear me, Hannah?
Forget the AI. She's falling apart like everything else on this ship. The Shard's on her last run, going out in a blaze of glory. I've activated the pod launch from the bridge. You'll be on your way in a moment. Just as well. You'd never have made a good clone legger, Hazel. Too soft where it matters. If you get out of this alive, raise a drink to me and the Shard. She was a good ship.
And before Hazel could say anything, the escape pod blasted out of its hatch and plummeted toward the planet below. On the bridge of the Darkwind, Captain Silence studied the small craft on his view screen as it slowly closed the distance between them. The Darkwind's disruptors had hammered away most of the pirates' force shields, and it was only a matter of time now before they failed entirely. And once that happened, it would all be over in seconds. It was a miracle the pirates' shields had lasted this long. The captain must have drained the ship's batteries dry to power them. The ship continued to drift closer, and Silence frowned thoughtfully. The pirate was up to something. He could feel it in his bones. He glanced at the investigator beside him and saw that she was scowling intently at the view screen too.
"Pirate ship's speed increasing, Captain," said his comm officer suddenly. "Accelerating steadily toward us."
He's trying to ram us,
said Frost.
The force shields will stop him.
But he must know that, said Silence. So why is he doing it?
"Captain, our shields are dropping. They don't answer the control panels."
Odin, what's happening?
The pirate ship has infected my systems with a virus, which is supposed to be impossible,
said the Star Cruiser's AI.
It's bypassing all my safeguards. I've never encountered anything quite like this. Systems are crashing faster than I can isolate them. Our force shields are down, and I am unable to raise them again. The pirate ship will impact with us in 6 minutes and 14 seconds.
Recommendations?
Abandon ship. If you leave now, most of the escape craft will survive the ensuing blast and should make a safe landing on Virimond. Go now, Captain. It's the only chance you have.
Silence looked at Frost, and then round his magnificent bridge. So many systems, so many highly trained personnel, and still there was nothing he could do to save his ship. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He patched into the shipwide address channel, and then paused a moment longer to be sure his voice would be calm and steady when he spoke.
Attention all hands. This is the captain. Abandon ship. I say again, abandon ship. This is not a drill. Remember your training and make your way to the nearest escape craft. We'll reassemble on Virimond. Good luck, everyone. Captain out.
He looked around him and clapped his hands briskly.
All right, that's it. Clear the bridge. Everyone out.
His people rose quickly to their feet and left the bridge with a professional minimum of fuss. Investigator Frost turned to go, and then stopped as she realized Silence wasn't moving.
Aren't you coming, Captain?
No, Investigator. This captain is going down with his ship. The main bulk of the Darkwind will probably survive the initial impact and only break up on entering the atmosphere. I have to be here to guide the ship down for as long as I can. I have to make sure the pieces will land safely in one of the oceans. Hundreds of thousands could be killed if any of the pieces were to land in an inhabited area.
You are more important. The Empire has a great deal of time and money invested in you, Captain. The colonists are just peasants. They don't matter.
They matter to me. Clear the bridge, Investigator. There's nothing you can say that will persuade me to leave.
No, I don't suppose there is.
She hit him once, efficiently, and he slumped forward in his command chair, unconscious. Frost checked the pulse in his neck, nodded once, and then picked the captain up and slung him almost effortlessly over one shoulder.
Odin, this is Investigator Frost. Acknowledge.
Acknowledged, Investigator.
The captain is indisposed. I am placing you in command. You will do everything in your power to guide the ship down so that its eventual impact does the minimum possible damage to inhabited areas. You understand I cannot take the risk of downloading you and taking you with us. There is no telling how much damage the infecting virus has done to your systems or how infectious it remains.
Yes, Investigator, I understand.
Frost looked once around the empty bridge.
Goodbye, Odin.
Goodbye, Investigator. Safe journey.
Frost turned and left the bridge, with the captain still unconscious over her shoulder. The empty bridge was filled with the low sound of the AI singing quietly to itself, and the pirate ship growing ever larger on the view screen. The Shard and the Darkwind, locked together, cartwheeled slowly through the silent night, falling toward Virimond. The Man Who Had Everything. The Deathstalker, Owen, Lord of Virimond, last of a famous warrior line, lay naked and exhausted among the crumpled silk sheets of his bed, and wondered lazily if he could work up the strength to call for a tall iced drink. It was late in the morning of another perfect day on the best of all possible worlds. The sun was shining. What passed for birds on Virimond were singing their little hearts out. Everyone was busy at their work, and he didn't have to leave his bed for ages yet, if he didn't feel like it. He sighed and stretched slowly, and smiled the slow, smug smile of the truly satisfied. He'd just had amazing sex with his long-term mistress, and when she got back from wherever she'd disappeared to, he fully intended to do it all again. Practice makes perfect. She wasn't really his mistress, in the sense that he didn't pay her a retainer or anything, but he liked the ancient word, with its undertones of sin and debauchery. He stretched again unhurriedly, content as a cat in the sun, staring up at the ceiling high above. When he did finally choose to get up, his most recent history was waiting in the computers for him to take up work on it again. It was a good piece, sharp and pointed and full of new insights. The kind of work he'd always known he was capable of, if he could just get away from interfering distractions, like having to train with sword and gun every morning, and study military tactics every afternoon in order to be the warrior his line demanded of him. No one had ever asked him if he wanted to be another bloody fighter like all his revered ancestors, but that was all behind him now. His father was dead, he'd inherited the title, and his life was his own at last. In short, he'd got it all. No doubt eventually he'd start getting bored with such perfection in several years or so, but until then he was determined to enjoy every minute of it. And why not? He was a nice guy. He deserved it. He looked around the huge stone chamber with its hanging tapestries and centuries-old hollows. The Deathstalker standing hadn't changed outwardly in generations. Every modern convenience was in place, ready to hand or call, but expertly concealed behind the traditional overlay. The standing had been the home of the Deathstalker clan for generations beyond counting, serving all their various needs with calm efficiency. When Owen had bought the lordship of Virimond, he'd had the entire castle dismantled, stone by stone, and had it and its contents shipped to Virimond, where it was reassembled surprisingly quickly by a small army of fanatical experts. You can do things like that when you're a lord. The standing was his, wherever he decided to plant his roots. All that was required of him was that he preserve it and hold it in trust for future generations. Assuming he ever got around to marrying and producing a next generation. His mistress was a delightful sort, but not at all the kind of person one married. As head of one of the oldest families in the empire, he had a duty to marry someone of his own rank and station. And he would. Eventually. Owen looked thoughtfully at the giant hollow on the wall opposite his bed, showing the original Deathstalker in all his fearsome aspect and martial glory. Warrior prime of the Empire and founder of the clan that still bore his name. He looked a bit rough and ready in his thick furs and steel mesh tunic, bristling with weapons, his head shaved in a mercenary scalp lock, but it didn't take too much imagination to transform his warrior's arrogance into a lord's nobility. According to family history, he'd been the greatest fighting man of his day, unanimously elected warrior prime, and elevated to the peerage by popular acclaim. Hard man by all accounts, and a bit of a bastard, but the public liked that in their heroes. Bloodied his sword on 100 worlds, and never backed away from an insult or a war. He was also the creator and wielder of the Dark Void device, which put out 1,000 suns in a moment and left their planets to sail silently through an endless night. The Dark Void. But no one talks about that anymore outside the family. Pity about what happened to him in the end, but that's politics for you. His son had taken over as Warrior Prime to the Empire, and things went on as they should. Owen wondered vaguely what the old man would have made of his most recent descendant. Probably would have had him put down the moment he showed any sign of intellectual tendencies. Owen couldn't bring himself to really give a damn. He'd always known he was a writer, not a fighter. He'd had a proper training in weaponry and all the martial arts, as befitted his station and inheritance, but it had never interested him. His interest lay in researching and piecing together the Empire's somewhat tangled history. Nothing excited him like reaching into the morass of legend and myth that made up so much of the past and producing one indisputable new fact, clear and sharp as a diamond in a coal mine. And if he'd learned one thing from all the histories he'd read and the tales he'd investigated, it was that most of the time there was no glory and damn all honor to be found on the battlefield. Only blood and mud and the endless bitterness of lost hopes. Most wars turned out to be squalid little affairs once you dug through the lies and propaganda, fought to protect trade interests or save political face. Owen was damned if he'd fight and die just so someone else could look good, particularly when he had so much to live for. The only real legacy he had from his mad old ancestor was the Deathstalker ring, an ugly, chunky circle of black gold handed down out of the unimaginable past, the sign and seal of Deathstalker authority. According to the family tradition, he was forbidden to remove it, save to pass it on to his eldest son. They'd had to cut off his father's finger to get it after he was dead. But then, Owen and his father had never got on. They'd always been surprisingly distant and distinct, considering how alike they looked. They were both tall and rangy, with dark hair and darker eyes, moving always with the quiet grace of breeding and long martial training. These days, in his mid-20s, Owen had lost some of the athlete's leanness. Good living and satisfied appetites had softened the lines of his muscles and padded his stomach. Not excessively so by any means, but his old weapons master would have thrown up his hands in despair at how out of condition his pupil had become. It was a thought that never failed to please Owen. The two of them had never got on either. He still worked out most days when he could spare the time, if only so he could keep up with his mistress. The bedroom door swung open, and Owen's mood changed in a moment as his mistress came bouncing in, bright and bonny, and tanned golden from perfect head to pointed toe. Kathy DeVries was in her early 30s, with a tight, compact body of wondrous delights. Average height, but far from average in every other way. Long legs, full body, long blonde hair falling around a heart-shaped face with marvelous high cheekbones. Kathy was inordinately proud of her bone structure. Prettiness fades, she was fond of saying, but a good bone structure lasts forever. She had the widest smile Owen had ever seen, and dark blue eyes to die for. She'd been his mistress for 7 years now, ever since she'd been presented to him as a surprise party favor at the winter ball on Golgotha. She'd been physically adapted at the House of Joy, a double-jointed contortionist trained in all the erotic knowledge of the ages and full of surprises. Multiple orgasms guaranteed or your money back. Buying up her contract was the best investment he'd ever made. Kathy was wearing his battered old dressing gown again, belted at the waist for a change. Usually she just let it hang open, partly for freedom of movement and partly because she knew how much he liked to look at her. This time the gown was belted tight, and the thought disturbed him for some reason. It wasn't as though she had anything to hide after 7 years of enthusiastic exploration. She was probably just teasing him again. She knew how to get him going. He noted with approval that she was carrying a tall frosted glass of white wine. She always could judge his mood to a nicety. On the other hand, the sight of her was more refreshing than any drink could ever be. He took the drink from her and put it firmly to one side on the bedside table. First things first. He reached for Kathy, and she stepped back, just out of reach. He frowned, puzzled, and she looked at him dispassionately.
Bad move, Owen. You really should have drunk the wine. You would have just drifted off to sleep and never woken up. So much simpler and more pleasant for both of us. Now we have to do it the hard way.
She reached inside the dressing gown and brought out a disruptor. Owen blinked stupidly at the energy weapon in her hand, and then old trained reflexes kicked in, and he threw himself out of his bed as Kathy fired. He hit the floor rolling, still wrapped in his sheets. The bed exploded into flames behind him. Kathy cursed briefly, put away the gun, and drew a long knife from inside the dressing gown. Owen wondered briefly what the hell else she had hidden in there, and then lurched to his feet, tearing the enveloping sheets away from him. He had 2 minutes until the gun's energy crystal recharged. He backed away as she advanced on him with the knife and looked desperately around him for some kind of weapon. Kathy's face was calm but determined, as though she was working on some minor puzzle whose solution for the moment escaped her.
Kathy, I really think we need to talk about this.
Too late for talk, Owen.
If this is some kind of joke, I don't find it in the least bit funny.
No joke, Owen. I'm canceling our contract. The escape clause is a bit of a bastard, but that's life for you. Or rather, death. Don't struggle and I'll make it quick.
Whatever they're paying, I'll double it.
You can't buy yourself out of trouble this time, dear. Now stand still and let me do what I have to do. At least have the decency to die with dignity.
Owen realized he'd ended up back by the burning bed and winced away from the leaping flames. He drew himself up to his full height and glared at his mistress. His nakedness rather distracted from the effect.
Kathy, you don't really think you can beat me in a fight, do you? I am the Deathstalker after all.
And I was trained in the House of Joy. They teach us all kinds of things there. You'd be surprised. We're both a little out of shape, but you've really let yourself go, Owen. If the knife doesn't get you, the gun will once it's recharged. Say goodbye, dear. It's been fun. Let's not spoil it.
She lunged forward gracefully while she was still talking, the long knife reaching for his heart. Owen sidestepped at the last moment, and the edge of the knife grated across his ribs as Kathy sailed past him. She recovered her balance in a moment and turned to face him again. Owen noted disgustedly that she wasn't even breathing hard. The long cut burned across his ribs, and he could feel blood coursing down his side. Much as he hated to admit it, Kathy clearly was in much better shape than he. The thought sparked a sudden anger in him, and as she came forward again, Owen fell easily into the defensive stance he should have been using all along. His weapon master had spent enough time hammering it into him. Kathy lunged again, and he stepped gracefully aside, seized her arm in one simple movement, and twisted it up behind her back. Her own speed and impetus slammed the hold into place, and she gasped in pain as he applied a steady pressure. Her fingers opened, reluctantly, releasing the knife. It fell to the floor, but Kathy kicked it out of reach before Owen could even think about going after it. And then she twisted strangely, pulled free of his grasp and sent Owen flying before he knew what was happening. He scrambled hurriedly to his feet, looking about him for the knife. Kathy pirouetted once, her long leg flying up, and her foot hit Owen expertly just above the ear. He managed to roll with some of the blow, but he still hit the floor hard again, his head ringing. Great, thought Owen, as he struggled to get his feet under him. All the assassins that could have come after me, and I had to get a double-jointed contortionist kickboxer. Well, when in doubt, improvise. And if that fails, cheat. Kathy came at him again, moving almost too fast for the eye to follow. Owen grabbed his clothes from the chair they'd been laid out on and threw them into Kathy's face. For a second she was blind and off balance, and that was all it took for Owen to snatch up the knife and thrust it between her ribs. For a long moment they remained as they were, Kathy on her feet, him on one knee, both breathing hard. Blood poured from Kathy's heaving side. The clothes fell away from her face. She gripped his shoulders fiercely, as though to hold herself up, but all her strength went out of her, and she sank to the floor, still holding on to him. He eased her down and sat with her, holding her tenderly in his arms. And blood ran from her mouth.
Damn! You've killed me, Owen.
Yes. I think I have. Why, Kathy? Why did you do it?
You've been outlawed. The news came through while I was getting your drink. All your titles, lands, properties, and monies have been seized. It's death to shelter or aid you. Anyone who brings your head, preferably unattached to the body, to the Imperial Court on Golgotha, will be rewarded with the lordship of Viramond and half your monies. Somebody really wants you dead, Owen.
She cleared her throat and spat, and there was more blood. Owen held her tightly. Outlawed? He tried to make sense of it, and couldn't. In the space of a few moments, his whole world had gone mad. Kathy coughed painfully and gritted her teeth against the blood. Her hands tightened on his arms, and he held her until the spasm passed. He didn't know what else to do.
Something else you should know, Owen.
Her voice was low and blurred now, and he had to concentrate to make it out.
I'm a spy. From the Imperial Court. They planted me on you all those years ago. I've been feeding them information ever since.
Hush, love. Don't tire yourself. I know. I've always known. It doesn't matter. Kathy looked at him.
You knew. And you never said anything?
What was there to say? My AI broke your cover right after you moved in with me. He's good at things like that. I never did anything about it because it was easier to have a spy I knew about and could keep an eye on than to have to identify and deal with whoever replaced you. And besides, I was fond of you.
I was fond of you. I never did have a head for business.
She leaned forward till her head was resting on his shoulder, shuddered slightly, and stopped breathing. Owen held her in his arms as the life went out of her, and then sat quietly with her, rocking her gently like a sleeping child. After a while he let go and laid her out on the floor. She seemed somehow smaller and more fragile now. He looked down at himself and grimaced at her blood and his on his skin. He picked up his shift from the floor and mopped at himself with it. He started to put it on, and then let it drop to the floor again. Nothing seemed to matter much now. The crackling of the flames from his burning bed caught his attention, and he thought vaguely that he should call someone to do something about it. He activated his comm implant, removed the Do Not Disturb, and accessed his home's AI. Ozymandias.
Shut up and listen,
said his AI.
You're in a lot of trouble, Owen. You've been outlawed, and there's a hell of a price on your head.
I know.
So does your head of security. He's on his way to you right now with as many guards as he could muster, with the explicit intention of separating your head from your shoulders. You never did pay him enough. You've got to get out of there now.
Kathy just tried to murder me. I had to kill her.
I'm sorry, Owen, but we don't have time for this. Everyone in the standing is probably heading for you with murder on their mind. You don't have any friends here anymore. Use the hidden exit, make your way through the secret passages, and get your private flyer. By the time you've done that, I should have a clearer picture of what's going on, and just possibly I'll have worked out what you should do next.
Owen padded over to the bedroom door, opened it slightly, and peered out into the corridor. There was no one there, but he thought he could hear someone in the distance, drawing closer. He shut the door and locked it, and then walked back to pick up his clothes. He dressed quickly, ignoring the blood on his shirt and skin. Whatever happened, he was damned if he was going to face it naked. Oz, why have I been outlawed? It doesn't make sense. I left the court and came here precisely because I wanted to avoid getting involved in the kind of intrigues that get you outlawed. I'm no danger to anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to get on with my histories.
The court didn't give any specific reason, but then it doesn't have to. The word of the Empress is law. I suppose, as a Death Stalker, your name could be useful to any number of factions in and out of the court. As I understand it, the Empress took a personal interest in you. And you know what that usually means.
Yeah. The last time she took a personal interest in someone, his remains ended up being sent to 17 different planets simultaneously, as an example not to make waves. All right, I'm dressed. Open the stairway. The hollow of the original Deathstalker swung sideways, revealing a narrow passageway. A light appeared deep in the tunnel. Like all good castles, the Deathstalker standing had several secret doors and hidden tunnels. Partly out of tradition, but mostly because the Deathstalkers had always felt it a good idea to have an ace or two hidden up their sleeves. Even Owen's head of security didn't know about these tunnels. Owen pulled on his best cloak and buckled on his sword, picked up Kathy's disruptor, and plunged into the narrow opening. The hollow swung shut behind him. He was still having trouble believing this was all really happening. 1 minute life was good and full and everything made sense, and the next, up was down, in was out, and people he'd known for years were trying to kill him. The last time he'd felt like this was when they'd brought him the news that his father was dead, cut down in the street as an enemy of the Empire. No one ever said why or what he'd done, and it wasn't safe to ask. Owen hadn't really been surprised. His father had been plotting and intriguing with this faction or that all of Owen's life.
A man should always concentrate on what he's best at, was all his father ever had to say on the subject.
Only it turned out he wasn't as clever as he'd thought, and Owen became the Deathstalker when he was 16. He'd tried to mourn his father, but he'd hardly known the man. They never spent much time together. His father was always off on some new scheme, chasing money or influence or fame. He wasn't noticeably successful. Owen's mother died when he was still too young to remember her, so most of his life had been spent under the governorship of a series of guardians, tutors, and friends of the family. His only real friend, certainly the only one he ever trusted, was the family AI, Ozymandias. He'd been very fond of Kathy, but he never trusted her. It surprised him that her death hurt him so much. All his father's warrior training and skill in politics hadn't been enough to save him, and Owen had drawn a lesson from that. He'd never been much interested in current politics, so he'd found it easy enough to turn away the various cabals that came sniffing around him once he inherited the title. He made it clear he was only interested in his histories and did his best to present an image of himself as dull, hopelessly studious, and completely self-involved. He dismissed his weapons master, turned his back on the court and its politics, and bought the lordship of Virimond, way out on the rim, a carefully safe distance from the Empress and her people. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes his father made. Only somehow, it had all gone wrong anyway. He kept turning it over and over in his mind as he quickly made his way down the passage. Lights turned themselves on before him and turned themselves off after him,
so that he moved in a constant pool of light through the darkness. He couldn't have been outlawed for no reason. It had to be some kind of ghastly mistake. If he could just get in touch with the right people, find out what had gone wrong, and explain everything, then maybe they'd put things right again, and he could have his life back. But to do that, he had to avoid his enemies and stay alive, which was easier said than done. Maybe he'd be better off heading for the Standings Communications Center. He could barricade himself in, call for help, and hope he found a sympathetic ear. Anything was better than just running blindly. Oz, what's the state of communications at the moment?
Pretty bad. All the main comm channels have been jammed. Local channels are okay, but I don't know for how long. Either way, it's clear you're not going to be allowed to plead your case. The more I look into this, the more convinced I am this was all set up at the highest levels. Hold it. The local channels just went down. All of them. I can keep this private channel open for a while, but I can't guarantee how long. In fact, there's not much I can guarantee anymore, except that you have to keep moving. Your head of security has burst into your bedroom with his people. They're all armed, some with energy weapons. He's found Kathy's body. Now they're tearing the place apart, looking for a hidden exit. They're being very thorough, but they seem to have forgotten my sensors. The head of security is not pleased at your absence. People can probably hear him being not pleased some distance away.
You can tell me all this later. What are the chances of his finding the hidden exit?
Not good. They're really not very bright, and I'm scrambling the sensor equipment they brought with them. I told you you should have let me choose your security people. This bunch hasn't got a clue, and they're getting nowhere fast. I feel like shouting out hot and cold just to encourage them.
Don't you dare.
Spoil sport.
Owen shook his head. If I ever find out who programmed that sense of humor into you, I'll have him strung up by his giblets. Could we please concentrate on the matter in hand?
Of course, Owen. Do you still have the Deathstalker ring?
Of course I've still got it. It'd take a half a tub of grease to get the damn thing off my finger. Why?
I've just discovered a file hidden deep within my memories, designed only to reveal itself in the event of your being outlawed. Someone was thinking ahead, though his motives remain unclear at this time. Apparently the ring is very important. It's a key of some kind. According to the file, you're supposed to take it to Mistworld, where you will find help waiting for you.
Is that all?
I'm afraid so. However, I feel I should point out that if there's one hidden file in my memories, there may well be more with further information, presumably to be triggered by future events.
This has my father's fingerprints all over it. Even after he's dead, he's still trying to run my life. Him and his bloody intrigues. Mistworld, for God's sake. The outlaw planet. Place is full of criminals and murderers, and the living conditions are barbaric. I wouldn't live there if you paid me. No, Oz, wherever I'm going, I'm not going there. I know what he wants. When he was killed, I was supposed to take his ring and swear vengeance, just like in all those operas he loved so much. Well, to hell with him. I wouldn't let him dictate my life while he was alive, and I'm not about to start now. If he wanted to risk being killed for his squalid little political maneuverings, that was up to him. But I have better things to do with my life, and not being killed is right at the head of them.
I'm sure your father only had your best interests at heart.
You're only saying that because he had it programmed into you. He never understood me, never even tried. He never understood that I never wanted to be a warrior. He hurried on for a while in silence. He had nothing left to say, and besides, he needed his breath for running. The tunnel was definitely heading downward, but after so many twists and turns, he'd quite lost track of his bearings. He'd never used the escape route before, and wasn't that impressed by it now. It was cold and damp, the ceiling was uncomfortably low, and it smelt awful. He supposed he should have expected that. You could hardly send the cleaning staff into a secret tunnel every other week. He slowed to a fast walk and breathed deeply. He had to be getting near the exit now, and he didn't want to arrive there exhausted and out of breath. You never knew who might be waiting. Oz, you still there?
Of course, Owen. Where else would I be?
Smartass. Look, none of this makes sense. Even if I have been outlawed, the court wouldn't just announce it to all and sundry. Even these days, under the Iron Bitch, outlawing a lord is extremely bloody rare.
and it's nearly always done in private. It wouldn't do for the lower orders to get a taste for killing nobility, would it? Might start giving them ideas. We're supposed to be special, far above them, untouched and untouchable by their petty little lives. You can't just outlaw a lord. It just isn't done.
It's certainly unusual. I can only assume the Empress really wants you dead. The reward on your head is unprecedentedly high. I wonder how much she'd give me for you.
Oz.
Just a thought. Hold everything. New update. Someone is trying to break into my programming. Professionals, too. They're cutting through my outer defenses like they're not even there. They've got some really heavy codebreakers, Owen. We could be in real trouble.
Imperial?
Has to be. But don't start panicking yet. I've been looking after you Deathstalkers for some time now, and I've learned a few tricks down the years, including how to appear a lot dumber than I really am while carefully leading them away from my core identity. Right now, as far as they're concerned, I'm just a jumped-up number cruncher with an AI overlay. And by the time they've figured out the truth, I plan to be long gone. So my files are safe for the time being, but the sooner you can download me from the castle mainframe, the better.
Hold everything, Oz. What have they done to my credit rating?
Owen, what they have done to your credit rating I wouldn't do to a dead dog. You are now worth squat. They've wiped out every penny you had and seized all your properties and holdings, including several they weren't supposed to know about. Look, I told you most of this already. Aren't you paying attention?
Shut up, Oz. This is serious. Without a credit rating, I'm dead. Wherever I'm going to need money. Let me think for a moment. The family jewels. They've got to be worth a small fortune.
Forget it, Owen. 1, you don't have time to go back and get them. 2, your head of security has people waiting for you there in case you're stupid enough to go after them. And 3, the jewels are quite well known in their own right. You'd be identified the moment you tried to sell them.
Owen scowled. I hate it when you're right. He rounded a corner in the tunnel and stepped out into the caves below the standing where he kept his private flyer. A disruptor beam blew away part of the wall where he'd been standing, sending stone fragments flying through the air. Owen threw himself back into the tunnel, swearing softly so as not to give away his position. He clutched tightly at Kathy's disruptor.
Why the hell didn't you warn me there were people lying in wait for me?
He sub-vocalized fiercely.
Sorry, Owen. The codebreakers have shut down my sensor apparatus inside the standing. I can no longer access any of the security systems. They're in deeper than I thought. They're getting close to the real me, Owen. There's still a lot I can try to hold them off, but I'm getting a really bad feeling about this. You have to download me soon, or risk losing me.
Great. Just what I needed. Something else to worry about. Look, can you access the flyer's sensors through my implant and see through those?
It'll be risky. The codebreakers could follow me to you.
Do it. I need to know how many men I'm facing and how many of them have energy weapons.
All right, I'm in. 3 men, 1 disruptor. They've all got swords. They've taken cover behind the flyer.
Damn. Who the hell are they?
More of your security people. I can give you their names if you want.
Wouldn't know them if you did. Not my province. As long as the head of security did a good job, I didn't interfere.
Well, in the future, assuming we have one, I suggest you take the time to make a few friends among your security people. Never know when it might come in handy.
Owen growled something in response, but he wasn't really listening. The fact was, in a moment he was going to have to take on 3 armed men, one of them with an energy weapon, and he couldn't put it off much longer. A hand disruptor only took 2 minutes to recharge between each shot, which meant he was running out of time fast. He had to make his move while the gun was still useless. 3-to-1 odds weren't that bad, not for someone with his training, but that was all he'd had, training. He'd never had to face these kinds of odds for real before. And he'd let himself get out of shape. He'd been so sure he was safe here. He pushed the thought to one side and unconsciously sucked in his gut. He was going to have to be a fighter after all, despite all the promises he'd made to himself after his father's death. He was going to have to be a Deathstalker, and all that meant. He drew in a deep breath, held it, and then let it out. A slow, purposeful calm crept over him. He smiled briefly, acknowledging the irony.
and then spoke the activation word, boost. Blood thundered through his head, and his heart raced. The buried subliminals kicked in, flooding his system with adrenaline and endorphins, and other serums from specially engineered glands. His muscles swelled, and his senses blossomed. He was stronger, faster, more efficient in every way. His thoughts were sharp and lightning fast. For as long as the boost lasted, he would be more than human, more than merely human. He couldn't maintain it for long, or it would burn him out, but he could stand it long enough to do what he had to do. He burst out of the tunnel entrance again, moving too quickly for the human eye to follow, raised his disruptor, and shot the man holding a gun through the chest while he was still reacting to Owen's sudden appearance. The energy beam punched right through the security man's chest and threw him aside. The energy gun flew from his hand, out of reach of the others. Owen was upon them both before the first man hit the ground. They seemed to be moving in slow motion to him, every second an age. Their swords rose nightmarishly slowly, and then he was among them, inhumanly fast and strong, supercharged almost beyond the ability of the human frame to bear. His sword ripped through one man's throat, half severing the head from the body, and then leapt on to plunge into the third man's chest. And as quickly as that, it was all over. Owen snapped out of boost and almost fell as all the accumulated stress hit him at once. He'd been using controlled hysterical strength, though not all of it. Using the muscles to their full extent would tear them clean away from the bones. His abused heart was hammering painfully fast in his chest. His breathing was quick and strained, and he was soaked with sweat. He shook uncontrollably as the chemical stew he'd pumped into his system slowly began to disperse. Just the shock alone would have killed an ordinary man, but he was far more than that. He was a Deathstalker, and the boost was the real Deathstalker inheritance. The shaking died away, and he smiled tremulously. Damn, he felt good. He shook his head slowly, forcing down the euphoria. It wasn't real, just a side effect of the endorphins still in his blood. This was the Deathstalker's secret, what made his family such perfect fighting machines. The constant temptation that had to be faced and mastered. A rush greater than any single drug could ever provide. A potential addiction stronger than any will could deny. This was the key to Deathstalker training, backed up by subliminal commands deep within the subconscious mind, only to use the boost when you had to. Owen had never really been tempted. The few times he'd used it before, under strictly controlled conditions, it had scared the crap out of him. It pushed aside the mind, brought out the beast that lurks in every man, and made him like it. Made him just the kind of man he'd always sworn he'd rather die than become. He pushed the thought aside and sheathed his blood-smeared sword without bothering to clean it. He'd pay a price for the boost later, but he couldn't let himself collapse in sleep until he was safely away from here, if anywhere was safe for him now, and assuming he didn't have to use the boost again. A memory came to him, reinforced by the last of the chemicals still moving sluggishly in his blood. He was 14 years old, and his father was beating the shit out of him in a training session to force him to use the boost, to become an adult Deathstalker. It took a lot of beatings before he finally learned how to summon the boost. Thanks a lot, Dad. Oz, any sign of more of these idiots?
No, Owen. According to the Flyer's admittedly somewhat limited sensors, there are no other life signs in the immediate vicinity. There aren't that many people who know about your outlawing so far, and they have a lot of ground to cover. But there is no knowing when they might discover your escape route and follow you down here. May I earnestly suggest that you power up the Flyer and get the hell out of here? Both your options and mine are shrinking fast. I'm having to use more and more of my systems to defend myself against the Imperial codebreakers. My mind is under threat. If you don't download me soon, I will be unable to assist you further.
All right, leave off the emotional blackmail. I'll see what I can do once I get to my private yacht. The Sunstrider has more than enough system capacity to hold you.
Owen smiled suddenly. And they said I was crazy to pay that much money for a yacht. I'll show them. The Sunstrider's got options built into her that most people have never even dreamed of.
The yacht was a wise choice in retrospect. I've always admired your family's capacity for practical paranoia.
Owen laughed breathlessly and threw open the canopy of his private flyer. It wasn't much to look at, just a long, slender cabin with wings and a small motor. Top speed of 100 if the wind was with you, and the energy crystals only lasted about a week between rechargings, but it was useful for getting around his estates, so he'd kept it handy. He'd never seriously considered it as an emergency route, but he felt more secure knowing it was there, and he wasn't reliant on anybody else for transport. He slipped into the pilot's seat and pulled the canopy shut. It only took a few seconds to power up the craft, then he lifted it carefully off its dais and flew out of the caverns and into the bright morning sunlight. The canopy darkened automatically to keep out the sunlight, but it still seemed painfully bright. He headed north, pushing the speed to maximum as fast as he dared. Virimond looked cool and green and calm and peaceful. It didn't seem possible that his life could be threatened in such a perfect world. The great grasslands rolled away in one direction, fields of waving corn in the other, both stretching as far as the eye could see. Low stone walls crisscrossed here and there, and people worked unhurriedly in the fields as though this was just another day. The bitter thought, "It isn't fair," flashed through his mind, and was gone. He didn't have the time for self-pity. Owen tore his gaze away from his people and accessed the flight computers through his comm implant. All systems were responding normally, and the energy levels looked sufficient to get him to where he'd hidden the Sunstrider, if nothing went wrong. The flyer had no weapons systems and no energy shields. A disruptor blast would rip through the cabin like a knife through paper. Owen felt suddenly vulnerable, alone in a flimsy craft, and he shuddered for a long moment before he could bring himself back under control again. The flyer's sensors suddenly murmured in his ear, informing him that there were 2 other flyers on his tail. They were only a few minutes behind him, and slowly but steadily they were closing the gap. Owen swore feelingly. He should never have authorized the extra flyers for his security people. He tried for more speed, but the low energy levels made the craft sluggish. It only took a quick calculation to show Owen the other flyers would catch him up long before he could reach Sunstrider in safety.
Oz, you still with me?
There's no need to shout, Owen. I'm not deaf.
Then take over the flyer's controls. Your reflexes are a lot faster than mine.
Yes, Owen.
The flyer lurched suddenly to one side and then back again, rising and falling at unexpected intervals.
Evasive maneuvers.
"Next time," said Owen, trying hard to hang on to his seat and his stomach's contents,
"a little warning would be appreciated."
Of course, Owen. I feel I should also warn you that according to this flyer's long-range sensors, there are at least 3 energy weapons on the flyers behind us. It would only take 1 hit in the wrong place to force us down.
I had worked that much out for myself, thank you. Any other good news you want to share with me?
Again, according to the long-range sensors, there are 3 more craft heading in pursuit. Too far off yet to identify the craft, but their speed implies they are much more powerful than the flyers, and they're closing fast.
Some days things wouldn't go right if you paid them. The flyer lurched suddenly as a disruptor beam tore through the left wing. The whole craft shuddered painfully, and its speed began to drop. It threw itself about the sky as the AI ran through every emergency maneuver the flyer was still capable of, but the damage had been done. Speed was down, altitude was falling, and the pursuing ships were drawing steadily nearer.
You'll have to take control, Owen. I'm under increasing attack, and I can't spare any more of myself to help you. You can contact me again if you reach Sunstrider. If not, I have enjoyed our relationship. Goodbye.
Oz! Ozymandias! Talk to me, damn you!
Owen waited, but there was no response.
Shit! Boost!
He didn't like to think what boosting again was going to do to him so soon after the last time, but it couldn't be helped. He needed the extra speed and reflexes it would give him. Blood hammered in his head, and new strength flooded through him. The flyer shuddered again as a second energy beam hit it from behind. The motor lost its high, confident tone and began to stutter. The nose dipped, and the flyer headed for the ground. To Owen, it all seemed to be happening in remorseless slow motion. but even though his hands were incredibly fast and sure on the controls, all he could do was guide the descent, not stop it. He was still a long way short of his destination. And for the first time, Owen realized he probably wasn't going to escape after all. The ground rose slowly up before him, and he aimed for an open patch of tilled ground next to a line of windbreak trees. His hands clutched at the controls with such strength that he bent them out of shape, and the flyer began to sluggishly respond. Then another energy beam hit him from behind, and all the lights on his control panels went out. The flyer dropped like a stone, the motor silent, and the ground came rushing up. The left wing hit first, spinning the flyer around. The impact slammed Owen forward against the restraining straps with brutal force, driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, he hung there, dazed and helpless, and then the boost jerked him awake. The flyer had dug its nose into the ground, and he was hanging over the spider-webbed canopy. He hit the strap release and lashed out with his fist as he fell forward against the canopy. Part of it shattered and fell outward, but there still wasn't enough space for him to crawl past the jagged stumps of glass thrusting out from the canopy surround. There was smoke in the cabin, and behind him he could hear the crackling of flames. He took firm hold of the edges of the canopy, breaking away some of the glass and ignoring fragments that still bit into his hands, and slowly he forced the metal rim outward. The solid steel groaned as it yielded reluctantly to his boosted strength. Blood slithered down his hands. Smoke filled the cabin, tearing at his lungs. He bent away the steel edges and finally forced his way through the jagged glass and out. He dropped bonelessly to the ground and lay still on the broken earth for a moment before the boost forced him to his feet again. Flames roared in the cabin of the flyer, and thick black smoke billowed up into the sky like a marker. The pursuing craft couldn't miss him now if they tried. He'd landed just a few feet short of the windbreak trees, and empty fields stretched out around him. He had no idea where he was, and the only maps were burning inside the flyer. He tried his implant again, but the AI was still silent. The boost moved in him like liquid fire, trembling in his supercharged muscles, and he felt as though he had all the time in the world to do whatever might be necessary. He checked his hands dispassionately. They weren't too badly damaged, and the smaller cuts were already sealing themselves. He felt no pain in his hands or anywhere else, and wouldn't till he came out of boost. At which point his aggrieved body would have a hell of a lot more to worry about than a few cuts and bruises. The human body wasn't meant to work at this kind of level for this long. He looked up and saw 2 flyers falling unhurriedly out of the bright sky toward him. 3 more craft hung in the distance like high-flying kites. Owen drew his sword with one hand and his disruptor with the other, and headed for the trees. He wanted something he could put his back against. He might not be a warrior like his father, but he was still a Deathstalker, and he would show his enemies what that meant. Whoever the enemy was. Probably more of his own security people, the ungrateful bastards. He set his back against a wide tree trunk and leaned against it for support. They might come at him from the front and sides now, but not from behind. Good to have something you could rely on in an uncertain world. The more he looked at his injuries, the more serious they seemed, so he stopped looking at them. The boost was screening him from the pain and shock, but it was also burning up dangerous reserves of strength. It couldn't maintain him much longer, especially if he had to fight for his life. He glared up at the sky, at the craft hovering overhead like vultures. The 2 flyers landed a respectful distance from his burning craft, and guards spilled out onto the tilled field. Owen counted 14 and nodded, satisfied. He was glad to see they were taking him seriously. Anything less would have been an insult. The 3 other craft dropped unhurriedly out of the sky. Owen tried to focus his drifting thoughts. There were bound to be more guards in the other craft, some with energy guns. In the end, it didn't matter how fast or how strong the boost made him. There were just too many enemies to fight. And even if by some boost-inspired miracle he could beat them all, staying boosted for so long would kill him anyway. Damned if he did, damned if he didn't. And maybe that was the real legacy of the Deathstalkers. occurred to Owen that he was going to die here, lost and alone and abandoned by all those he trusted. But the thought didn't scare him as much as he thought it would. He'd lost everything that mattered, and a few that didn't. Title, money, position, even people. I was fond of you, Kathy. Even if he could somehow find a way to survive this ambush, and what he was doing to himself with the boost, the only future he'd have was as an outlaw and renegade, with every man's hand turned against him. Dear God, I've killed Kathy. Owen felt suddenly tired, despite the boost. It wasn't that he wanted to die. He just didn't see the point in going on. Everything he valued had been taken from him by people far beyond his reach. Revenge seemed unlikely and even pointless now. It wouldn't bring back what he'd lost. If he was going to die, he thought he'd rather go out in a dignified way, not fighting and squealing like a pig in an abattoir. He cut off the boost and almost fell as his wounds burst open again. Blood poured down his body, and his legs trembled so much he could hardly stand. He used the last of his strength to put away his sword and disruptor. It wouldn't give the bastards the satisfaction of a struggle. The men who used to be his guards advanced purposefully, weapons at the ready. Owen wrapped himself in what was left of his pride and dignity and fought to keep his head up. And then a ship came crashing down out of nowhere, and everything changed. The guards scattered, crying out in shock and alarm as they tried to run every way at once. The gleaming steel craft blocked out the sun as it roared down and then slammed into the broken earth, and sat there, large and ugly and immovable. Owen would have run too, but his legs weren't listening to him. He looked blankly at the squat, squarish ship before him. A simple steel container without identification or markings, which was, of course, strictly illegal. He slowly realized it wasn't any kind of flyer, but rather some kind of escape pod from a larger craft. A hatch swung open, and a steel ramp slammed down. A slim figure appeared in the hatchway. Owen took a moment to register that it was a woman, and another to realize that she was almost the same age as he, and in almost as bad condition. She was burned, her flesh and her clothes blackened and scorched. He thought she might have been pretty if her face hadn't been white and splotchy from pain and shock. She was also carrying the biggest and ugliest handgun he'd ever seen. She glared at him and gestured at the interior of her ship.
Move, you idiot! Those bastards will be back any moment, and I, for one, don't plan to be here when they get their act together and start shooting. Shift your ass and get in here!
Fashion, paranoia, and elves. The Imperial Palace lay deep in the rotten heart of Golgotha, homeworld of the Empire, the concentration of power and of destiny. It lay hidden away, far below the surface, drawing its power from a geothermal tap, sunk so deep even a scorching by the entire fleet couldn't touch it. Up above, the delicate towers and pastel cities of the elite, the noble, and the moneyed. Down below, like a cancer in a rose, a massive steel bunker 1.5 miles wide, the home and fortress of Her Imperial Majesty, Lionstone the 14th. And within that bunker, behind the many layers of cutting-edge technology, a court of gleaming steel and brass, where the whole empire came to pay homage to its ruler. The personification of honor and duty, law and justice, whose whisper was louder than thunder, and more far-reaching. Lionstone the 14th, the perfect and divine, the worshipped and adored, also known as the Iron Bitch. Her private chambers comprised the heart of the bunker, surrounded by layers of guards and protection, some of which never slept. The Empress had many enemies, and she liked it that way. Love passed and honor changed, but fear remained constant. Lionstone was the latest in a long line of rulers, and she had no intention of being the last. Her private chambers, where she only had to be herself, were bedecked with silks and flowers of 100 vivid hues from 100 different worlds. The air was perfumed with subtle and gorgeous scents that were also quite deadly, unless you'd been immunized to them. In the midst of it all, Lionstone sat at her toilette before a full-length mirror, attended by her surgically altered maids-in-waiting. They moved about her with silent grace, like so many butterflies, dressing her in the armor and furs necessary for a formal appearance at court. Lionstone the 14th was tall and slender, towering over her maids by a good head and more. Her face was fashionably pale, but with none of the usual splashes of color that fashion dictated. She had little taste and less discrimination, and didn't give a damn. She had long, sharp-edged features, with a wide slash of a mouth and brilliant blue eyes, topped by masses of pale blonde hair piled up on top of her head. Her back was straight, her head erect, and her gaze could chill at 100 yards. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. Her maids fluttered around her, adjusting a fold here and a hem there. Their hands were always moving, their touch gentle but sure. Lionstone trusted them completely. She never spoke with them, either in conversation or to inquire their opinion. They had nothing to say. Lionstone had had their tongues cut out, so they couldn't talk about her. She'd also had them blinded and deafened, and now they knew the world only through cybernetic senses. It wasn't fit or safe that anyone should have direct knowledge of Her Majesty in her most private and defenseless moments, so Lionstone's maids-in-waiting were deprived of the senses nature gave them in return for more perfect and controllable artificial systems. Her maids had always been rebels or debtors or outlaws, or perhaps just someone who had fallen from favor. The Empress had them mind-burned and reprogrammed, and those who had once dared defy her now served as her most devoted slaves. The thought never ceased to amuse her. Lionstone tapped her long-nailed fingers impatiently on the arms of her chair as her maids-in-waiting put the last touches to her appearance. She held herself immobile till the tall, spiky crown cut from a single diamond had been lowered respectfully onto her head, and then she surged to her feet, scattering the maids with a wave of her arm. She studied herself in the mirror, and the reflection nodded approvingly back. The body armor fitted her snugly from throat to toe, dully gleaming where it wasn't disguised by thick, luxurious furs from the inner worlds. Only her face remained bare, as tradition demanded. In an age of clones and other duplicates, the Empire liked to be sure exactly who was ruling them. Outside her boudoir, a crowd of people filled the corridor, desperate as always for her attention. They swarmed around her in a babble of voices as Lionstone strode down the corridor. The maids kept them from getting too close. No matter how desperate the importuners were, they all had enough sense not to upset the maids. They finally reached the private elevator at the end of the corridor, and Lionstone waved the crowd away. Most of them fell back immediately. The few who didn't react quickly enough almost fell over themselves backing away as the maids turned their unwavering gaze on them. Lionstone glared at the closed elevator doors as she waited for it to arrive. She was on the verge of being late for her own audience, and that would never do. No one would say anything, of course. If she chose to be late, that was her business, and no one would have the temerity to disapprove. But the word would start quietly in certain quarters that just possibly the Empress was slipping, growing lax, and the kind of people who had assassins on their payroll would lick their lips in anticipation. A delicate chime interrupted her thoughts as the elevator arrived and the doors slid open. The maids checked it out first with their augmented senses, decided reluctantly that it hadn't been tampered with, and allowed the Empress to join them inside the elevator. Lionstone the 14th smiled slowly, and if the courtiers waiting for her to arrive could have seen that smile, they would have found sudden pressing reasons to be somewhere else that day. The only way to reach the court chambers from anywhere else on Golgotha was by underground trains controlled directly by palace computers. The trains were prompt, comfortable, and guaranteed accident-free, but still no one liked using them. People of importance were not used to or happy about giving up control over their personal security. But in this, as in so many other things where the Empress was concerned, they had no choice. Her security came first. Always. As a result, everyone setting foot in a palace-controlled train did so knowing that they were literally putting their lives in the Empress's hands. Lionstone sometimes used the trains as a simple means of dealing with those who had gained her displeasure. At a silent command from the palace computers, the train would stop, the doors would lock, steel shutters would slide over the windows, and a lethal gas would fill the carriage from end to end. The gas jets weren't even hidden. The Lord Jacob Wolfe glowered at the jets and then looked away. They were old news, and he had more pressing concerns on his mind. The Empress's summons to court had been abrupt and uninformative, even for her, with barely an hour's warning, which meant that whatever had caught her attention was urgent as well as important. It wasn't necessary to attend court in person. You could always send your holo image. Current technology allowed the elite complete access to all that was happening, with no risk that some of it might happen to you. However, by tradition and law, only those who attended in person would be heard by the Empress. So if you wanted your voice to count, you had to be there. Besides, for someone to appear only as a holo at court was a risk in itself. Lionstone might choose to interpret that as a personal insult, that the Lord didn't trust his Empress to ensure his safety. It didn't do to give the Empress ideas. She had far too many of them as it was. Which was why the Wolf and his son Valentine were sitting alone in their carriage, without weapon or bodyguard, on their way to court to hear something they probably wouldn't want to know anyway. Jacob Wolfe was a great bull of a man, with broad shoulders and a barrel chest that wouldn't have looked out of place on a professional gladiator. He wore his hair cropped close to his skull, maintained his face as that of a man in his 40s, and ignored all fashions as they came and went. His jaw jutted always forward, as though daring anyone to comment. His eyes were dark and piercing, and it was a point of honor to him that he never looked away first. He had hands like mauls, large and blocky, curled most often into fists, and his voice was a growl. The Wolf had put a lot of time and thought into the image he projected, and he was quietly pleased with the result. It let people know right from the start that he was not a man to be trifled with. The Wolf was 103 years old, but thanks to imperial science, the young man sitting opposite him could easily have been mistaken for his brother rather than his son. Even so, a stranger would have found it hard to detect any family resemblance between them. Valentine Wolfe was tall, slender, and darkly delicate, like a hothouse flower rudely torn from its usual habitat. His face was long and thin, and more than fashionably pale, and his shock of jet-black hair fell to his shoulders in curls and ringlets. Heavy mascara highlighted his overbright eyes, and a painted crimson smile hid his feelings from one and all. He had an artist's hands, all long, slender fingers and languorous gestures, and they fluttered about his throat in moments of excitement, like startled doves in the night. Valentine Wolfe was well known in and out of court for having tried every drug known to man, and a few he'd had made up specially. If you could smoke it, sniff it, or stick it where the sun doesn't shine, he'd tried it all once, and twice if he enjoyed it, which he usually did. It was truly said he'd never met a chemical he didn't like. It was a wonder to all who knew him that he hadn't fried his brains long ago. But by some dark chemical miracle, his mind remained sharp and dangerous. He had the usual enemies for a man in his position, and looked like he would outlive them all. And though he chose not to play the game of intrigue himself, he could still be a subtle and malevolent influence on those who did. Valentine might be a hothouse flower, but his thorns were poisonous.
He produced a tab from a silver pillbox and pressed it against the side of his neck, over the main vein. His painted smile widened like a scarlet wound. His father sniffed disapprovingly.
Do you have to do that now? We'll be at court soon, and we're both going to need all our wits about us.
It's just a little something to take the edge off, Father. Rest assured that all my many resources are at your disposal. If I was any more alert, my synapses would be going into meltdown. Why do you suppose Her Imperial Majesty, long may she reign, desires our company this time?
Who knows why the Iron Bitch does anything these days? I've spent more time traveling back and forth in these damn death traps this last week than I'd normally expect in a month. She's not following any of her usual patterns, and all my usual sources have either disappeared into the woodwork or developed unexpected scruples. I've been paying the little turds good money for years, and just when I really need them, they fold on me. Assuming I make it back from court in one fairly large piece, heads are going to roll, boy, and I am not being metaphorical. She's planning something. Something she knows the Company of Lords won't approve of. So she's doing all this just to keep us distracted and separated. It's a smokescreen, sleight of hand. But hiding what? Pay attention, boy. One of these days, loath though I am to admit it, you're going to have to take over from me as head of the family. And I won't have it said I didn't do everything in my power to ready you for that.
Far away may that time be, Father. You do so much for me, and I never appreciate it. I have a few trifles about me that are said to boost intellect and liberate the mind. Would you care to try a little something?
No, I would not. I've never needed drugs to be smart. Show me how smart you are. Why do you think the bitch wants to see us this time?
Valentine drew a flower from his sleeve. It had a long stem bristling with thorns, and its thick, pulpy petals were black as night. He sniffed the flower appreciatively, then took one petal between his perfect teeth and pulled it free. He ate the petals slowly, savoring the juices. The Empress has been most disturbed of late, ever since news came in of two newly discovered alien species outside the Empire, with technologies at least the equal of our own. One would have been enough as a potential threat, but the prospect of two such species seems to have practically unhinged the poor dear. Then there's the cyber rats playing their disruptive little games in our computers, the clone underground spreading its proclamations everywhere you look, and let us not forget the elves, bless their black little hearts. The elves have been growing increasingly arrogant, not to mention successful in their attacks of late. And of course there are always the endless court intrigues with their plots and schemes and intricate designs. Some days at court you don't dare cough or scratch your ear for fear someone will take it as a sign to start something violent. Still, you don't need me to tell you that, Father. The wolf smiled briefly. It was not a pretty sight.
So, you have been paying attention at least. They're all good answers, but which one would you pick? Where does the real danger lie for the Empress and for us?
Valentine Wolf ate another black petal, chewing thoughtfully. Bright spots of color glowed on his pale cheeks like badly applied rouge, and his dark eyes saw many things. The aliens are too distant a threat to be worrying our dear Majesty yet. Perhaps we should just introduce the aliens to each other, and then stand well back while they fight it out. The cyber rats are too few and far between to be anything but a nuisance, and the clone underground lacks the funding necessary to emerge as a real political force. And the elves have been surprisingly quiet these past few days. Obviously, that won't last, but I would have to say they've done nothing outrageous enough just recently to justify our dear Majesty's abrupt summons. No, I fear it's more simple than that. Dear Lionstone has caught someone of standing with his pants down, or his hand in the till, and she wants us to watch and take notes while she has something extremely unpleasant and instructive done to him. Le Madame Sans Merci, Our Lady of Pain, the Iron Bitch. Jacob Wolf nodded slowly and flexed his great muscles.
Good. That's more like it. One of us is going to get the chop, and she wants us there to witness it and be reminded where the real power at court lies. Nothing new there, except that for once I don't have a clue as to who it might be. And that is strange. There's usually some whisper going round where my agents can overhear it. So watch yourself when we get to court, boy. Keep your mouth shut and your veins clear, and take your lead from me."
"Of course, Father." Valentine finished the last petal and began to chew slowly at the stem, ignoring the thorns. A thin trickle of saliva mixed with blood ran down his chin as he smiled, and Jacob Wolfe looked away. The antechamber to the imperial court was grand enough in its own right to put any other court to shame. A huge open chamber of gleaming steel and brass, it stretched away in every direction for as far as the eye could comfortably see, the vista broken here and there by tall, intricately worked pillars of gold and silver, set at regular intervals as much for the effect as anything else. And still the packed crowd filled the antechamber from wall to distant wall. Everyone who was anyone, or thought they might be, came to court when the Empress held audience to shake the hand of those in favor or snub those who weren't, to make family agreements or business deals, or just to be seen at court by the billions watching on their holoscreens throughout the empire. All the families were there, the cream of the aristocracy, carefully keeping a respectful distance between themselves and sworn enemies, or simply those of discernibly lower status. Holograms stood to one side, nodding politely to each other, given away by the occasional faint shimmering as some security field interrupted the signal for a moment. Forbidden by law and custom from speaking or drawing attention to themselves, they drifted among the gorgeous lords and ladies like ghosts at the feast. The families conversed quietly as they waited, searching for support or one-upmanship or simply the latest gossip. Heavily armed guards stood here and there, ostentatious in their scarlet armor and visored faces. No one paid them any attention. The families knew that they were being watched, and that the guards were only the most obvious part of it. Mostly they were just there to ensure the peace among feuding clans. None of the families were allowed bodyguards or weapons of any kind, but when words grew heated, blows often followed. And then the guards would move in and restore order with savage gusto. It wasn't often a low-born guard got the chance to manhandle a lord, and they intended to make the most of it. So the guards watched and waited, and the Wolves kept away from the Campbells, who kept away from the Shreks, and so on and so on. Open violence was so gauche, after all. Lord Crawford Campbell, head of his clan, moved slowly among the families with bright eyes and a wide smile, like a shark maneuvering in a shoal of lesser fish. He was less than average height and more than average weight, and didn't give a damn. The Campbells always maintained that the greatness of a man could be seen in the breadth of his appetites, and Crawford Campbell was well known for his many indulgences. He was well over 100, but modern science kept his face as full and unmarked as a child's, none of which did anything to blunt the man's intellect, which remained razor-sharp and just as dangerous. The Campbells were in favor at court for the moment, not least because the Campbell had sacrificed so many others who stood in his way. Not that anyone could prove anything, of course. The customs and protocols had to be observed. People nodded respectfully to the Campbell as he passed, and gave him plenty of room. He took it as his due. And if sometimes a lesser lord or lady showed a different face to his back, Crawford Campbell never gave a damn. He didn't have to. Drifting at his side or in his wake, like a multicolored bird of paradise, was Crawford's eldest son and heir, Finley Campbell, dressed as always in the brightest silks and graces current styles allowed. Tall and graceful and fashionable to the moment, from his polished thigh boots to his velvet cap, Finley glided among the lords and ladies with a smile and a nod and a polite murmur, allowing himself to be seen by as many as possible. He might have been handsome beneath the cosmetics that made a mask of his face, but it was almost impossible to tell. The current mode called for fluorescent skin that glowed a shimmering silver and shoulder-length metallic hair, every strand individually coated with whatever metals were currently in favor. He wore a cutaway frock coat that showed off his exquisite figure, and a pair of pince-nez spectacles that he didn't need, and every pose he struck was the epitome of grace and style. Finley Campbell was a dandy and a fop, and though he wore a sword on all occasions when fashion demanded it, he had never been known to draw it in anger. No one ever drew on him, of course, because he was a Campbell after all, and you could never be sure with them. His father had given up disowning him because it didn't work, but made no secret of the contempt he held for the fancy poet who had somehow sprung from his manly loins. Even so, no one ever intrigued against Finley. The Campbell was deadly enough for both of them, and would brook no insult to the family name. Crawford Campbell worked the crowd with ease, nodding to those in his favor, or the Empress's, and cutting dead everyone else with glorious scorn. Though his movements seemed random, he was in fact quartering the chamber with military precision, making sure he saw everyone who mattered and marking their face and position in his memory. It was important to know who had come to court and who had not, or sent a hollow in their place. Knowledge was everything in the cut-and-thrust politics of Lionstone's court. The Campbell approved when he thought about it. A certain genteel savagery helped to weed out the weak and the timid. His gaze suddenly lightened as it fell upon a familiar but uncommon face, and he strode briskly through the crowd, giving people just enough time to get out of his way if they were quick.
Summerisle, my dear fellow! A pleasure to see you, as always. What brings you to court?
Lord Roderick Summerisle bowed formally in return. Against the current fashion, he showed his true age in his lined face and thick white hair, though his back was still straight and he held his head high. The Summerisle disapproved of the current court almost as much as it disapproved of him, and he was rarely seen in public. He dressed in the formal style of the previous emperor, even though it was forbidden, and kept dangerous company. No one ever said anything. The Summerisle had been a master duelist in his day, and no one was at all sure that day was over. He smiled at the Campbell almost reluctantly, and took the proffered hand.
Campbell, looking as disreputable as ever, I see. Still in favor? Of course, silly question. It's been years since I last found it necessary to attend court, but some things never change. Virtue still goes unrewarded, and the scum still rises to the top.
Campbell grinned.
You never did approve of me, Summerisle. Lucky we're friends, or we'd have killed each other years ago.
Oh, I doubt it. You were never that good with a sword.
Campbell produced a sudden bark of laughter, and people who'd been edging closer to eavesdrop quickly moved away again. It was said by many and believed by most that the Campbell sense of humor was more dangerous than his rage. Campbell and Summerisle had been rivals since they were born, and down the long years had been surprised to find it was easier to like an enemy they admired than an ally who had to be supported for family reasons. The rogue and the honest man, friends despite themselves, bound as tightly as only opposites can be. Campbell fixed Summerisle with a thoughtful stare, and moved a little closer.
What does bring you here after all these years? I thought you decided politics were for the lower orders, like myself.
My opinion of this court has not changed one iota. You are the living proof, Campbell. How many better men have you trampled underfoot to reach your present position?
I stopped counting. It was starting to make me big-headed.
Summerisle shook his head slowly.
You are everything I despise in this court, and I am everything you sought to stamp out in your long career of murder and double-dealing. What do we have in common?
Dead enemies, mostly. We've survived because we've outlived everyone who tried to kill us. We've seen emperors come and go, and the empire spread 100-fold. Political parties rise and fall, businesses bloom and wither, but we go on, matchless and unstoppable. Who else could we talk to who've seen what we've seen, fought as we have fought? Personally, I like you because you don't take any shit from anyone, especially me. As for you, you value the truth where you hear it, even if you don't like what it's telling you. You know where you are with me, Rod.
Summerisle smiled briefly.
You always did talk too much, Crawford. How are your sons?
A pain in the ass, as always. All married off at last and producing grandchildren, but otherwise no bloody use at all. I swear Finley is trying to achieve suicide or martyrdom through sheer excess of fashion. Sometimes I wish he would, just so he'd stop embarrassing me. If he wasn't my eldest, I'd have him smothered in his sleep. There were 6 others ahead of him. Good boys all. But they all died from duels, or treachery, or politics of some kind. They're gone, and I'm left with Finlay as heir. If the gene test hadn't proved he was mine, I'd swear his mother stepped out on me. And the others are worse, if you can believe that. My blood must have been running thin when I fathered that batch. At least Finlay has a mind of his own, even if he doesn't use it much.
Campbell stopped and looked unhappily at Summerisle. His voice became low and gruff.
I heard about your son's death. He should never have fought that duel. He didn't stand a chance.
No, he didn't. But he had no choice. Honor demanded it.
You haven't answered my question yet. What has brought you back to court after all your years of self-imposed exile?
Her Majesty summoned me with a personal note in her own handwriting. Said she had someone she wanted me to meet. How could I say no?
I would have. When Lionstone starts taking a personal interest in you, it's time to change your name and head for the Rim.
Campbell scowled thoughtfully.
What does the Iron Bitch want with you?
She didn't say. Just that my presence was required at this audience. It doesn't matter. My wife is dead, and all my sons. All I have left is my grandson, Kit. And we don't get on. And I'm too old to be frightened. So, here I am, a loyal subject of Her Majesty. Campbell's loud bark of laughter turned a few heads, but only briefly. The space around him and Summerisle was growing.
Your loyalty has always been to the throne, not whoever happened to be sitting on it. I don't think you've had a good word to say about Lionstone since she stabbed her nanny when she was 6.
Oh, I don't know. I've got a very good word for Lionstone. Only I'm too much of a gentleman to use it. He waited patiently for Campbell's laughter to subside. Her father was a hard man to love, if not to follow, but I never doubted he had the well-being of the Empire at heart. Lionstone cares for nothing and no one save herself. She's a spoiled brat, and always has been. Which is not exactly unusual in royal stock, but bearable when diluted with some sense of duty. We've seen many royal backsides on the Imperial throne, Crawford, but I honestly fear for the Empire under Lionstone 14.
Get out of here, Rod. Whatever the Iron Bitch has to say to you, I don't think either of us wants to hear it. Nothing good will come of it. Leave now, while you still can.
Where would I go? Where could I go where Her Majesty's hounds wouldn't drag me down sooner or later? I never ran from an enemy before, and I'm not about to start now. She's brought me here to kill me, I know that. But I will end my days with dignity, as a loyal subject before his monarch, even if that monarch is not worthy of that loyalty.
Very pretty. It'll look great on your tombstone. Why make it easy for her?
It's called duty, Crawford. You must have heard of it. When honor calls, a man must make his stand. If he is a man.
As you wish, Summerisle. Just don't stand too close to me while you're doing it.
They shared a brief smile, and then looked round sharply as the great double door swung smoothly open, the massive slabs of beaten steel gliding back as though they weighed nothing. A long fanfare rang out, silencing the chatter of the courtiers, and bright lights spilled out from the great courtroom of Lionstone the 14th. The courtiers moved toward it in fits and starts, like moths drawn to a flame. First went the company of lords, all those of the first 100 families of the Empire, those who ruled planets or companies or armies by right of succession in the Empress's name, the highest of the high, most noble and acclaimed of Her Majesty's subjects. In theory, at least. They strode into the great courtroom, looking neither left nor right, their heads high. Secretly they felt naked without their usual retinues of bodyguards, advisers, and sycophants, but a lord came alone to meet his Empress, without even a sword on his hip. It was a sign of trust and respect, not to mention imperial paranoia. And after them came the 250 members of Her Majesty's Parliament. They represented the economic forces in the empire, the power and influence of the mighty credit. Only those with a high enough income were allowed to vote, of course. Unless one was of noble birth, Parliament was the only way to gain access to the inner circles of government. A member of Parliament might be obliged to bow to a lord if they met in the street, but in an audience with the Empress, their voices were equal. If the members were ever to act in unison, they could have brought the company of lords to heel like so many unruly dogs. But the Parliament was split into several opposing factions, and the lords took care to keep it split through quiet patronage and the occasional large bribe. Of late, Parliament had been increasingly disturbed over the threat of higher taxes to pay for the expansion of the Imperial fleet to face the possible threat from the 2 newly discovered alien species. In theory, the Empress was bound by law and custom to abide by whatever decisions Parliament and the Company of Lords could bring themselves to agree on. In practice, the Empress would listen when she was in the mood, and then make up her own mind. Lionstone had the backing of the army and the fleet, and as long as she did, no one could make her do a damn thing she didn't want to. Which was why the prospect of an enlarged and more powerful fleet was causing a lot of sweaty hands and sleepless nights among Parliament and the Lords. Some members had been heard to say they didn't believe in the new aliens, but as yet no one was prepared to say that in public, let alone at court. But on the other hand, Lionstone's position was not as powerful as it had once been. A great many younger sons of the aristocracy, unable to inherit a title, had ended up making careers for themselves in the army and the fleet. And as they advanced in rank, so their influence grew, so that the army and the fleet were no longer the unquestioning servants they had once been. All of which meant that the political structure at court was one of complete chaos, over which the Empress presided through canny politicking and sheer force of personality. After the members of Parliament came the bulk of the crowd, family members, political hangers-on, businessmen and officers, and anyone else who could bribe, beg, or steal an invitation. And finally, right at the back, in hard-worn clothes with hard-worn faces, came the 10 commoners who'd won the Imperial Lottery that year. They had won the right to visit the court and petition the Empress in person for her aid or charity or justice. Of course, actually raising your voice at court was a risky business. A commoner had no friends there, and sometimes it was better if the Empress didn't notice you. On the whole, lottery winners tended just to enjoy the occasion. Some spent the whole year at court and never did ask their question. The court itself was a swamp this time. Thick curls of mist hung on the humid air between gnarled and twisted trees, and everywhere was at least ankle-deep in dark, smelly water. Knotted vines hung down from lowering branches to trail in the water, and the air was thick with flies and other insects. The courtiers splashed doggedly on through the swamp, keeping a wary eye open for crocodiles or other unpleasantness that might be lurking in the deepening muddy water. Just because it wasn't a real swamp didn't mean there weren't real dangers to be found in it. Most of it was holograms with just enough physical reality here and there to make it authentically uncomfortable. Lionstone liked to keep her court interesting, and her tastes were both devious and wide-ranging. In the past, she'd turned her court into a desert, an Arctic waste, and an inner-city slum. That one had been really dangerous, and everyone had suffered from fleas afterward. The courtiers slogged on, muttering darkly, their mood not helped by the knowledge that the whole empire was watching them suffer. Every planet, no matter how poor or how far-flung, had access to the workings of the court, thanks to the artfully concealed holocameras. The lords and the members swore every year that they were going to put a stop to the ancient custom, but somehow they never did. No one could resist the thought of so large a watching audience. Every now and again, a gleaming silver statue would appear out of the mists, fashioned to show the form of one of the many alien species that had been brought into the Empire and taught their place. There were a hell of a lot of them. No one knew exactly how many. No one really cared. Some of the statues had actually outlasted the species they represented. There weren't many who cared about that either. It was, after all, first and foremost, a human empire. Some of the older courtiers leaned on the statues to get their breath back, after first checking for booby traps. The Empress sat casually on a great throne of black iron and gleaming jade, set just high enough to keep her feet out of the water. She looked perfectly at ease, even though the throne had obviously been designed for someone rather larger. The mists curled away from where she sat, calm and comfortable in her own little circle of cool air. She looked cold and regal and perfect in her royal robes and diamond crown, every inch an empress. Her maids-in-waiting crouched naked in the muddy waters at the base of the throne, like so many hunting dogs straining at unseen leashes. The courtiers slowly assembled before the throne, careful to maintain a respectful and safe distance, and bowed to their empress. She looked down at the hundreds of bowed heads and yawned. The courtiers stayed bent over, hot and sweating, waiting to be released. Once she'd kept them there for an hour. She finally gave a signal with a bored wave of her hand. A fanfare sounded, and the courtiers straightened up, with some surreptitious massaging of the back here and there. No one was stupid enough to say anything. One look at the maids-in-waiting was enough to put the thought out of anyone's mind. Their faces were blank, inhuman, and their artificial eyes had the direct, unblinking gaze of insects. They watched the courtiers with unwavering concentration, and now and then metal claws eased out from under their fingernails, ready for use. A muffled cry sounded among the company of lords, as Lord Gregor Shrek stared in open horror at one of the maids. He started to move forward, and the maids tensed. Shrek's family quickly closed in around him, holding him in place and muttering earnestly in his ears. Finally, he had enough sense to look away, though his hands and his mouth still trembled with impotent rage and sorrow. A quiet murmur ran through the court, as they realized that the rumor had been true after all. The Shrek's niece had disappeared from her apartments barely a month ago, and had not been seen since. No one was surprised. It was increasingly common knowledge that she'd been mixing with the wrong sort of people. There'd been rumors of treason, but then there always were. And now here she was, her memories and personality stripped away, so that her body might serve the Empress's needs as a maid. The Shrek had recognized her, but in the end, he said nothing. There was nothing that could be said. The Empress leaned forward in her throne, and the court became silent. The courtiers listened respectfully, dabbing with silks at the sweat that ran down their faces. The maids didn't listen. They watched.
Most loyal subjects, welcome to our court. We trust you find its current aspect amusing. Normally there would now be ceremonies of greeting and respect, but we will pass those by today. We have matters of import to discuss. The Empire faces a threat such as it has never faced before. Not one, but 2 new alien species have been discovered, whose technology has achieved comparable levels with our own. They pose a threat to the Empire that is both real and imminent. An attack could come at any time. I have therefore placed our army and fleet on full alert. All reserves will be called up, and all industries shall be placed on a war footing for the duration of the emergency. This will, of course, prove somewhat expensive, and therefore all taxes and tithes had been raised by 7% effective immediately.
She stopped and looked about her, as though inviting comment. No one was stupid enough to say anything. There was more coming, they could feel it. Lionstone smiled graciously into the silence and continued.
The news we bring today is not all bad. Our scientists have recently perfected a new form of hyperdrive for our starships, powerful and inexhaustible beyond anything we have ever known before. Mass production will begin shortly, and every ship in our fleet will be fitted with one.
She waited again, but there was still no response, though thoughts were flying frantically behind a great many impassive faces. If this new drive could do everything the Empress implied it could, it would make all the other drives obsolete, which would mean, among other things, that the Empress's ships would have an unbeatable advantage over all others. In order to compete, all privately owned ships would have to acquire the new drives, at no doubt exorbitant rates. Another form of indirect taxation. On the other hand, someone was going to acquire the right to mass-produce the drive, and that someone stood to make a hell of a lot of money. It took a moment before the courtiers realized the Empress was speaking again.
We regret to inform you that the elves have been busy again. spreading pain and destruction throughout our empire. But our advisors assure us that they pose no real threat. They have limited numbers and little or no access to advanced weaponry. They will be stamped out. Is that not correct, my Lord Dram?
A man was suddenly standing beside the Empress's throne as the hollow that had been hiding him fell away. Tall and dark, in jet-black robes and battle armor, he stood rigidly at parade rest, his stance almost inhumanly perfect. He looked to be in his early 30s, but no one knew how old he really was. He'd appeared apparently out of nowhere some 10 years earlier, and guarded his secrets well. He was handsome in an unspectacular way, but his dark eyes and slight smile were utterly cold. He wore an energy gun and a long sword on his hips in the presence of his Empress, the only man in the Empire so entitled. He was the Lord High Dram, warrior prime of the Empire. Elected to that position by popular vote, he held it for life, though warrior primes tended not to live all that long. The Empress had bestowed on him control over the military in all its aspects, and made him personally responsible for her security and safety. The finest fighting man the Empire had ever produced, bloodied in 100 major actions, he was adored by the commoners, wooed by Parliament, and universally loathed by the lords for his power and influence with Lionstone. The two of them were supposed to be lovers, but again, no one knew for sure. Most of the court found the thought of the Empress having anything to do with something as warm and vulnerable as love frankly ludicrous. It didn't stop a hell of a lot of people trying to find proof, one way or the other, so it could be used as leverage. Dram had made Warrior Prime after personally leading the attack force that destroyed the Elves' main headquarters, hidden among the pastel towers in the floating city of New Hope. Dram and his Marines had come falling out of the sun on gravity sleds and opened fire the moment they were in range. The fragile towers cracked and shattered as gunfire raked through them, and people ran screaming in the streets. The Marines kept firing. The people of New Hope had known what they were doing when they allowed the Elves to live among them. Dram had his orders, and taking prisoners wasn't one of them. So the towers fell and people died, and the Elves were forced out into the open to fight or die. They never had a chance. Dram had the numbers and the weapons and the advantage of surprise. Most of the Elves were mowed down the moment they showed themselves, and in the end, the only ones who survived were those who ran. Dram left the city of New Hope in flames, a burning coal floating in the sky. He brought back the Elves' heads so that they could be displayed on pikes, as a lesson for the wise and the virtuous. The people had clapped and cheered whenever Dram made an appearance in public after that. He was the hero of the hour. The people had no use for terrorists, especially those who weren't really human. They made Dram Warrior Prime, and then the Empress took him for her own. The Elves' plans and capabilities had been almost wiped out, and even now, a year later, they were only just beginning to reassert themselves. Everyone was waiting with bated breath for Lionstone to unleash her hound on them again. Dram got results. Everyone knew that. What wasn't as widely known was his willingness to sacrifice his own people, if that was what it took to get the job done. A man could make a good career serving under Dram, if he lived long enough, which was the other reason why Dram was also known as the Widowmaker, though never to his face. The Lord High Dram had fought 17 duels in the last year, over everything from an open insult to a raised eyebrow at the wrong time, and never even looked like losing any of them. Didn't stop people from trying to kill him, though. The Company of Lords truly hated him, and their pockets had no bottom where Dram's death was concerned. The rewards for information that could be used against him kept rising, with little practical effect. Dram had no obvious vices and less weaknesses. He seemed completely untouched by the appetites and excesses of the court, had no friends, and his enemies were dead. His voice spoke for the Empress, and its word could not be challenged. Men, women, and children were killed openly in his name, for treason and lesser crimes, to discourage others. His last victim of note had been the previous Lord Deathstalker. That death had stopped the Lord's plotting for almost a week.
First order of business,
said the Empress, and everyone paid attention.
We will hear from our agents now.
Another man appeared on the opposite side of the throne. Like the Lord High Dram, he had been there all along, hidden behind a concealing hologram, waiting for his cue. The Empress had always had a fondness for the dramatic gesture. The new arrival wore the silver brand of the Empress's personal espers on his brow and was dressed in pale, characterless clothes. Like the maids, he no longer had a mind or personality of his own. The Empress's secret agents and information gatherers made telepathic contact through the esper's powers, and he then repeated their reports in their own words. The agents remained anonymous, and security remained complete. The esper's face changed suddenly as an invading personality took it over, and the body's whole stance changed too, becoming casual, even relaxed.
All right, pay attention because I'm not going to repeat myself. I've worked my way into the heart of the cyber rat underground, such as it is. They don't have any formal organization as far as I can tell, just a bunch of losers and loners hacking into the computer matrix wherever they can find or force an opening and having as much fun as they can before they get caught. Their politics are feeble-minded and their personalities are inadequate. But unfortunately, the threat they pose is all too real and far out of proportion to their numbers. They know computers better than the people who make them. If we stamp out this bunch, others will take their place before you can blink. Makes more sense to keep an eye on the ones we've got. At least we know where to find them if we want them. And just maybe I can keep them on a leash and away from anywhere sensitive. That's it. End of report. And while I've got your attention, I'd just like to say that I would very much appreciate being transferred off this job and as soon as possible. These cyber rats are driving me crazy. The sugar-packed junk they eat is doing terrible things to my system, not to mention my teeth, and the conversation is rotting my brain. Away from their computers, these divots aren't exactly social lions, you know.
The esper's face and stance changed again as a different agent reported in. The face seemed suddenly leaner, more aesthetic. The stance that of a man trained in meditation techniques. If he'd looked any more relaxed, he'd have probably floated away.
Agent Harmony reporting in. My infiltration of the clone underground continues. No one suspects me. They remain suspicious and evasive, but I am making progress. I have as yet discovered no definite aims or planned criminal acts. The underground's politics are largely naive and unfocused due to the lack of a charismatic leader figure. Should the clone underground acquire such a rallying point, they could become dangerous. As things stand, I have to report that the underground remains a negligible threat to the Empire.
Yeah, well, that's mostly because you couldn't find your ass in the dark without using both hands and a map,
snapped a third voice. The Esper was suddenly scowling fiercely, his stance a defiant slouch.
This is Agent Rapunzel on the Lord Dram's staff. I've been hanging out with the clone underground for 3 years now, and I'm telling you, these unnatural bastards are potentially the greatest threat the Empire's ever seen. They've got numbers, a rationale, and heavy-level funding and high-tech support from someone high up. And we're talking really high. Don't know who yet, but I'm working on it. In the meantime, these people want civil rights for clones, and they're prepared to do practically anything to get it. All right, they haven't got a charismatic leader yet to pull things together, but the way things are going, it's only a matter of time. Will someone please listen to me? The crunch is coming, and I want out of here.
We will speak later,
said Dram.
Now give the Empress back her Esper.
Gladly. You wouldn't believe the state of this guy's mind. Doesn't anyone ever clean up around here?
Now, Rapunzel.
No one ever appreciates you in this business.
And the Esper's face became clear and blank again. The court remained quiet while all this was going on. Clashes between the Empress's private agents and those belonging to the Lord High Dram were common, as both sides fought for the ear of the Empress. Their respective employers encouraged the rivalry to be sure they would continue to hear the things that mattered, whether they wanted to hear them or not. It occasionally came to blows, but as yet they'd stopped short of sabotage, though their clashing over the outlawing of Owen Deathstalker had come damn close. The Empress's agents had wanted it kept quiet, while Dram's agents, for their own as yet inscrutable reasons, had taken it upon themselves to broadcast the news to one and all. The argument was still going on. Agents lived brief professional lives of stealth and danger, switching identities and even personalities as they strove to dig up information while hiding their true motives in an age where nothing could remain hidden for long. Agents therefore tended to be professional but eccentric, not to mention quick on their toes. They never knew when their cover might be blown, and they'd have to leg it for the nearest horizon with a hunting pack snapping at their heels. The lords and the members had their own agents, of course. Everyone did who could afford it, and a few who couldn't. Knowledge was power in Lionstone's court, especially if you got it before anyone else. The Empress looked at Dram, who looked right back at her, and then they both looked back at the court. Whatever disagreements they might have in private, they always presented a unified front in public. A great many people had invested a great deal of money into schemes intended to drive a wedge between them, to no avail. Didn't stop people trying, though.
The problems facing our empire grow more serious with every day that passes. New alien threats, rebel undergrounds, and more. Now, more than ever, we must insist on the full support of our subjects. If the empire were to fall, untold billions would die. Colonists on the outer worlds rely on the empire for supplies, as the inner worlds rely on them for materials. Even we here on Golgotha, home world of the empire, have become dependent on others. No man can fail to do his best, or the whole system that supports us all would collapse. I therefore have no choice but to call for a 10% rise in the output of all our industries by the end of the year.
There was a long pause. 10% was unheard of. It would mean longer work hours for everyone and cost both lords and members a great deal of money. The members looked at each other. Someone had to say something. After an uncomfortable silence, pregnant with unspoken words, the member for Shadegate North cautiously cleared his throat.
Your Majesty, times are hard for all of us. Credit is scarce, and our resources are not what they were. If we were to attempt the rise in productivity you suggest, I really think the workforce will revolt. We would quite definitely face go-slow, strikes, and even sabotage. Unless, of course, Your Majesty is prepared to provide monies from the imperial purse to see us through these stormy waters, I fear...
Fear? You should fear me, Minister. Fear for the fate of the Empire if our ministers fail us, and fear for yourself if you fail to carry out our commands. If you can't get the job done, we will have you arrested and executed and see if your second-in-command can do any better. Certainly they'll be more strongly motivated to try harder. Is that clear, Minister?
Eminently so, Your Majesty. I'm sure none of us wish in any way to fail our Empress.
Oh, some do, Minister. You'd be surprised. Traitors can be found in the most unexpected places. Isn't that right, Lord Summerisle?
And everything went very quiet, as all heads turned to look at the Summerisle. People near him drew away slightly, as though his condition might be contagious, and in a moment he was standing all alone in a circle of empty space. Summerisle looked slowly about him, but didn't seem particularly surprised. He looked back at Lionstone and smiled slightly. His gaze was direct, and in that moment he seemed every inch the warrior he'd always been.
One man's traitor is another man's hero, Your Majesty. Perhaps you had some specific name in mind?
Perhaps we did. You have spoken out against us too many times, Summerisle. Thwarted our will too often.
I can remember when it was no crime for a man to speak his mind. Of course, that was a long time ago in your father's day, and many things have changed since then.
Lionstone smiled.
You have displeased us, Summerisle, because your many words of criticism were aimed not only at ourselves, but also at our empire. Can we rely on you to refrain from such treasonous talk in the future?
Don't be silly, Lionstone. I'm too old a dog to learn new tricks, and I wouldn't if I could. I remember you as a child. You were so full of fun when you were younger. If I'd known what you'd grow into... I probably would have let you live anyway. I was always too soft where children were concerned. I'm all that remains of your father's inner circle. The others are all dead. Some at your hand, some not. Just as well. They'd hate to see what you're doing to the empire they swore to maintain. Under you, honor is a joke, and double-dealing is the norm. Justice only for the rich, and death for those who dare to disagree. 13 generations of your line built this empire, Lionstone, only to see it crumble in your iron fist. You are the cancer at the heart of the empire. The blight on the rose.
There was complete and utter silence in the court. Lionstone had been leaning angrily forward on her throne, but she made herself relax and lean back before she spoke.
You always did talk too much, old man. You stand condemned by your own words. Let no one say we did not give you a fair chance.
Oh, get on with it. I'm to be an example to silence others. I knew that before I came here. Send forward your pet executioner, and we'll get this show on the road.
He glared defiantly at Dram, but the Widowmaker just stared calmly back, his hands nowhere near his weapons. Lionstone smiled sweetly.
You're not worthy of the warrior prime, Summerisle. I have a more appropriate executioner for you.
She nodded to one of her maids, who leapt to her feet, raised her clawed hands above her head, and clapped twice. A third man appeared out of nowhere as the concealing hologram blinked out and moved forward through the muddy waters to stand smiling at the Summerisle. A slender figure in black and silver armor, he was young and more than fashionably thin, with pale blonde flyaway hair, icy blue eyes, and a killer's smile. He carried a sword on both hips, and he walked like a predator. People drew back at the sight of him, and a low whisper passed softly through the packed crowd. He smiled and nodded to the courtiers, and those nearest him recoiled as though he tossed a snake into their midst. They knew who and what he was. Everyone in the court had heard of Kid Death, the smiling killer. He strode slowly forward, and the gentle lapping sounds of the water against his boots were eerily loud in the quiet. He finally came to a halt an arm's length from the Summerisle, and the two of them stood face to face, the old man and the young, the invincible warrior and the undefeated duelist. Kid Death drew the sword on his right hip, reversed it, and offered it casually to Summerisle. The old lord bowed formally, took it, and then took up a fighter's stance. The younger man drew the sword on his other hip and fell into his own stance. Summerisle nodded approvingly.
Glad to see all my training hasn't gone to waste, Kit. You were the best pupil I ever had.
Thank you, Grandfather.
Another child who turned out wrong. What the hell was wrong with your generation? Maybe there was something in the water.
I'm what you made me, Grandfather. The most skilled swordsman in the Empire. You sharpened the blade. Did it never occur to you that someday it might be used against you?
Summerisle hefted his sword, his face fixed on his grandson's eyes.
You killed your father and your mother and both your brothers, and the law couldn't touch you because you said they were duels, and there was no one to contradict you. I should have killed you myself, but I couldn't. You and I are all that's left of the Summerisle line, Kit. Don't let it end here, in senseless bloodshed, just to please the Iron Bitch.
I'm doing this to please myself, Grandfather. Doesn't the student always want to prove that he's become better than the teacher? As to serving the Empress, I am a killer, so I must go where the killing is. My parents disapproved of the life I led and tried to stop me. So I stopped them. And my brothers, too, later, when they came looking for vengeance. They won't be missed, any of them. They dared little and achieved less. But I go on, the best of the best, death on 2 legs, Her Majesty's executioner in all but name. One day I'll have that, too, and then there'll be a new warrior prime.
You won't last that long, Kit. She'll see to that. Tell me, boy, did you ever feel anything for your family? I love them so much.
No, grandfather, not a thing. Not even when I killed them. Enough talk, old man. Let's dance.
He stepped forward, the sword moving easily this way and that, searching for an opening. Summerisle went to meet him, moving only as much as he had to, the tip of his sword pointing always at his grandson's heart. And his eyes were cold and steady. For a moment they circled, each wary of the other. And then they came together, in a flash of steel and the crashing of blades. The encounter was over in a moment. Then they were circling again. There was a long red slash along Kid Death's left cheek, and blood trickled down his face. Summerisle had drawn first blood. His grandson smiled widely, then threw himself forward. His sword was everywhere, and the sheer ferocity of his attack forced Summerisle back, step by step. And then he stood his ground, and would not give up another step, no matter how hard Kid Death pressed him, as though he had said, "This far will I go, and no further." Their swords slammed together, and they stood face to face, straining with all their strength for the upper hand. Summerisle's breath was coming fast, and his face was flushed. His grandson wasn't even breathing hard. Kid Death held Summerisle's eyes with his, and surreptitiously drew a dagger from a concealed sheath in his sleeve. Summerisle smiled suddenly, and nodded, and Kid Death thrust his dagger between the old man's ribs. Summerisle grunted once, and then coughed. Bright, bubbling blood spilled from his mouth, and the strength went out of him. His sword fell, and Kid Death ran him through with a short, brutal motion. Summerisle sank to his knees, his blood spattering the surface of the water. Kid Death pulled free his sword, sheathed it, and then bent over his grandfather, their faces close together.
You knew that trick. You taught it to me. You knew it was coming, and you did nothing to stop me. Why?
Because I have no wish to live on in the kind of empire Lionstone is building.
The old man paused to spit out a thick gobbet of blood.
And because you are the last of the Summerisle line. If I'd killed you, the line would have ended with me. Can't have that. You'll be the Summerisle now, boy. Maybe you'll make a better job of it than I did.
His head dropped slowly forward, as though he was bowing to his grandson, and then he fell forward into the muddy waters, and lay still in a widening pool of his own blood. And Kit, Lord Summerisle, straightened up, shrugged briefly, and turned away.
I have my own name, old man. The name I earned. And I like it better than anything you ever gave me.
He drew his bloody sword and saluted Lionstone with it, and she bowed regally in return.
Don't go too far, Lord Summerisle. I may have need of your services again. There is still another traitor who must be dealt with.
Kid Death took a relaxed stance beside the throne, pushing the Empress's Esper out of the way, and set about cleaning the blood from his blade with a piece of rag. In the forefront of the crowd, the Campbell watched guards drag Summerisle's body away, and said nothing at all. Lionstone nodded to her maid again, and once more she rose up and clapped her hands twice. 2 guards appeared from the mists behind the throne, pushing a large transparent sphere ahead of them. It hovered at waist height, kept clear of the foul waters by its anti-grav field. Within the sphere, a man sat slumped, his head hanging down from exhaustion. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with a heavy-set face and figure. His long golden robes might have been imposing once, but they were tattered and soiled now, mostly with his own blood and vomit. He wore no chains, but the sphere held him as securely as any cage. A quiet murmur, quickly stilled, ran through the court, as those at the front recognized the new prisoner and sent his name back through the crowd. The guards brought the sphere to a halt before the throne, so that Lionstone could look upon her new victim.
My lords, ladies, and gentle friends, allow us to present to you
Judge Nicholas Wesley. Once he presided over the highest court in our empire, his name a synonym for law and justice. We thought that of all our subjects, we could trust him implicitly. We were wrong. He thought his word was law. But there's only one law in the empire, and that is ours. And having forgotten his duty, he threw away his honor by associating with quite the wrong sort of people. Tell us, Judge, how long have you been a supporter of the Clone Underground?
The packed court was deathly silent as it waited for the judge's answer. If ever a man in the Empire had been trusted and admired, even revered, it was Judge Wesley. His judgments were legends of reason and honesty. His few books required reading. And now he sat slumped in a stasis sphere, bloodied and humbled. And perhaps there was no justice in the Empire anymore. He looked up slowly, as though even as simple a matter as that took much out of him. Somewhere along the line, he'd suffered a severe beating. One swollen eye was entirely closed, and dried blood crusted his split lips. But even though he had fallen so very far, there was still a dignity about him, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured.
I served you for 38 years, Lionstone. I gave justice to all who came before me. Or that is what I told myself. It is my shame that it took me so long to see the evil in you and your laws. My life had become a mockery of everything I thought I believed in. But finally, I saw the truth, and I will not look away now, even if the light is painfully bright. The simple truth undid me, that clones are people too.
Not unless we say they are. You haven't answered our question, Judge. How long have we nursed a traitor to our bosom?
The judge met her gaze unblinkingly and said nothing. The Empress smiled.
Do you understand the nature of the sphere that imprisons you, traitor? It's a stasis field. Within that sphere, time does as we command. We can speed it up or slow it down. A year can pass in a second, or a second can last a year. You could lose a decade in the blink of an eye. Live out your whole life in the time it takes you to answer our questions. Unless you choose to be reasonable. Give us the names of the scum you dealt with and where they may be found, and you shall go free. We give our word as Empress.
The judge smiled suddenly, and fresh blood ran down his chin as his lips split open again.
Your word is worthless, Lionstone. Truth and honor are not in you. I have nothing to say.
The Empress sat back in her throne and gestured sharply to one of the guards by the sphere. He made a small adjustment to the control on his wrist, and the judge grunted loudly as though someone had hit him. His hair grew longer, and thick strands of white appeared in it. Heavy lines dug deeply into his face. His frame shrank subtly, and his hands withered into claws. He moaned with pain as arthritis filled his joints. Lionstone raised a hand, and the aging stopped. Within the sphere, the equivalent of 40 years had passed in a few moments.
Talk to us, Nicholas. This is the last chance we can offer you. Are you really willing to die to protect creatures who aren't even human?
Judge Nicholas Wesley gave her a smile that had as much of the skull as humor in it.
The lowest clone is more human than you, Lionstone.
The Empress gestured angrily, and time roared through the sphere like sands rushing through an hourglass. The judge grew withered and frail. His hair fell out and his skin mottled. A skull replaced his face, as bones pushed out against the tightening skin, and still he had nothing to say. Time passed. The judge died, and his body decayed,
and then there was nothing left in the sphere but his torn robes and a few bones crumbling into dust. The guard collapsed the stasis field, and the sphere disappeared. The judge's robes dropped into the muddy waters and sank from sight. Out in the antechamber, Captain Silence and Investigator Frost sat alone in chains inside a force screen. The field shimmered on the edges of their vision whichever way they looked, so that the antechamber had an unreal, ghostly look to them. Silence wasn't fooled. The danger they were in was all too real. He'd lost his ship and allowed the Deathstalker outlaw to escape. He should have died honorably at his post as his ship went down. His clan would have mourned his name, and it would all have been over. But the investigator had insisted on saving him for her own inscrutable reasons, and so here he was, secured at the ankles, wrists, and throat, with enough chains to hold a dozen men, waiting to see which interesting and especially painful death the Empress had in mind for him. Officially, he was entitled to a court-martial before a board of his peers and fellow officers, but the Empress outranked them all when she chose to, so she had first claim on him. Besides, the best he could have hoped from a court-martial would have been a quick death. Silence rattled his chains briefly and sniffed. Shoddy workmanship, but still more than enough to hold him, even without the force screen. He wasn't going anywhere. There was nowhere to go. Nowhere the Empress couldn't find him. Besides, he wouldn't have wanted to live as an outlaw anyway, always on the run, looking back over your shoulder to see if they were gaining on you. No peace, no chance for happiness, or honor. Silence sighed heavily, not for the first time, and looked at the investigator sitting beside him. Their captors had taken special pains with her bonds, loading her down with thick steel chains until a normal person would have collapsed under the weight of them. Frost ignored them, sitting proud and erect on the wooden bench as though it was her own idea to be there. The force screen was mainly for her. She was an investigator, after all, and no one was taking any chances. 2 armed guards stood before the closed double doors, waiting for the call to bring the prisoners in. They looked large and tough and extremely competent. Silence would have doubted his chances against them, even without the chains, and with a sword in one hand and a grenade in the other. He sighed again and rattled his chains mournfully.
I wish you'd stop doing that.
Sorry, not much else to do.
They'll let us out of the screen soon.
That won't make any difference, Investigator. We're not going anywhere.
You mustn't give up, Captain. There are always options.
Silence looked at her. Is that why you rescued me from the bridge of the Darkwind?
Of course, Captain.
Thanks a whole bunch. But I forgive you, Frost. It must have seemed like a good idea at the time. Frost stirred, and her chains rattled briefly. The armed guards looked at her thoughtfully.
I was just doing my duty, Captain.
Does that mean you wouldn't try to escape now if you could?
Of course I would, Captain. I'm loyal, but I'm not stupid. We must keep our eyes open and our wits about us. There are always options.
And then the double doors swung open a short way, and the 2 armed guards moved toward the prisoners. One drew his disruptor and pointed it meaningfully at Frost. Silence felt vaguely insulted. The second guard made an adjustment to the controls on his wrist, and the force screen disappeared. Silence looked at Frost. If you have any suggestions or ideas, now would be a really good time to share them.
We could always use our chains to club anyone to death who got too close to us.
Good idea. Get them to kill us quickly. Keep thinking, Investigator. The guards gestured for Silence and Frost to pass through the double doors and into the waiting court. They kept well back, both their guns trained on the Investigator. Silence gathered up his chains and rose awkwardly to his feet. It took him a moment to get his balance as the heavy weight shifted, and then he stumbled toward the doors. If he hadn't had experience on heavy gravity planets, he doubted he'd have been able to move at all. The guards would have loved that. They were just looking for some excuse to beat the crap out of him again. Silence gritted his teeth and kept moving. Frost walked beside him, back straight and head erect, ignoring her chains as though they were so many party favors. She was courteous enough to keep pace with Silence, and somehow That made it worse. They passed through the waiting doors and were immediately ankle-deep in filthy water. Silence was past caring. It was just one more indignity. He splashed on, fighting to keep his head up. The court was packed. They must be expecting a really unpleasant execution. A narrow aisle formed before him, people drawing back as though not wanting to be associated with him even by proximity. Silence didn't care. At least they weren't shouting or spitting or throwing things. Though come to think of it, he might have preferred a little shouting. The continuing silence was becoming unnerving. He struggled on, Frost at his side, the guards a respectful distance behind them. Silence looked about him as best he could, and the courtiers looked back with something in their faces that might have been expectancy. And it occurred to Silence that the Empress wouldn't have summoned this many important people to court just to watch him and Frost die. They had to be here for some other, more important reason, which suggested that just maybe there were still options open to him after all. Finally, Silence and Frost came to a halt before the throne of Lionstone the 14th. Silence felt ready to drop, but forced himself to stand straight, despite the chains. He had a strong feeling this would be a really bad time to show weakness. Frost stood beside him, looking calm and composed as always. Something moved in the deeper waters not too far away, and Silence wondered fleetingly if there was something alive just below the surface. Something alive and hungry. The Empress did so like her little jokes. It didn't really matter. If it got too close, Frost would take care of it. Silence looked back at Lionstone, and she smiled down at him coldly. He bowed as best he could. She was his Empress, after all. Frost didn't bow. One of the guards stepped forward, gun raised to club her to her knees. Frost braced herself and lashed out with a stiffened leg. The guard took the boot in his gut and just had time for a surprised, breathless grunt before he went flying backward into the crowd. They all ended up in the water, splashing and cursing. The guard didn't get up again, and neither did some of the courtiers he'd slammed into. Silence had to smile. He could always depend on Frost to make an impression. A brief clamor of protesting voices began in the surrounding crowd, only to die swiftly away as the Empress glared at them. She looked back at Silence and Frost, and Silence, for one, was surprised to find she was still smiling. It only took him a moment to decide that he didn't like the look of that smile at all.
Leave my guards alone, investigator, there's a dear. They're frightfully expensive to replace. Believe me, you're in no danger here. The chains are just a formality.
A rather heavy formality, Your Majesty. May I inquire as to why we are here?
We have a use for you, Captain. We were rather annoyed with you in the investigator. You lost us a perfectly good starship, and you failed to bring us the head of that most wretched traitor, Owen Deathstalker. We wanted his head very much. We were going to stick it on a spike right here at court, so that everyone could see what happens to those who dare defy us, whatever their status. We were also planning to have you both killed in slow, painful ways as a sign to those who dared fail us, but we changed our mind. We have a use for you.
Here it comes, thought Silence, wishing he could duck.
You pleased us greatly in your handling of the alien menace on Unseelie, both 10 years ago and more recently. Their uprising threatened the stability of the Empire, but you put a stop to that and to them. You also discovered the alien starship that crashed there recently and dealt with its occupant before it could contact its own kind and warn them of our existence. For this, and for other services on your part, you have our gratitude and a pardon for all your crimes.
The crowd broke into more or less spontaneous applause as the remaining guard activated the controls on his wrist. Padlocks clicked open one after the other, like a run of firecrackers, and the chains fell away from Silence and Frost. They dropped into the muddy waters and were gone. Silence rubbed gingerly at his chafed wrists, his mind whirling. It wasn't so much what Lionstone had said as what she hadn't said. She hadn't mentioned their discovery of a new star drive in the alien ship. Of course, there were all sorts of reasons for that. Firstly, it wouldn't do for the court to get the idea that the aliens might actually have a technology that was, in some ways at least, superior to the Empire's. And secondly, as long as the court thought her scientists controlled production of the new star drive, they wouldn't do anything that might offend her for fear of being refused access to the drive. Both of which were very good reasons for having him and Frost silenced. Something bad was coming, all right, and it was headed right toward him. He could feel it, like the cold breath of death herself on the back of his neck.
We hereby reinvest you in your previous ranks. We give you a new ship, the Dauntless, fitted with our new star drive. You will go to the planet Grendel and open the vaults of the Sleepers.
A shocked gasp rippled through the court. Everyone remembered what happened the last time a starship made contact with Grendel. The planet had seemed empty, peaceful, perfect for colonization. But deep in the ground, the investigatory team had found the remains of a vast alien city, long abandoned, and massive steel vaults, ancient almost beyond measurement. They opened one of the vaults, and the Sleepers awoke. Hideous alien creatures, nightmares in flesh and blood, and spiked silicon armor that was somehow a part of them. They were huge and impossibly fast, with metal claws and teeth. They wiped out the entire landing party in a matter of minutes. The Empire sent down seasoned attack troops, battle espers, even adjusted men. They all died. Luckily, the aliens had no starship of their own. They were trapped on the planet's surface. The fleet moved in and scorched the surface of the planet from orbit. Grendel was under quarantine now, guarded by half a dozen star cruisers. There were other vaults and other sleepers, and the Empire had no wish that they should awaken. Apparently that had changed now. Silence shook his head disgustedly. Grendel. He almost thought he'd rather have been executed.
Might I inquire why we're opening this particular can of worms again, Your Majesty?
Of course, Captain. You're going to open the vaults one at a time and discover, by whatever means you deem necessary, how to tame and train the Sleepers. You will have unlimited access to funds, men, and weaponry. Call on whatever you need to do the job. It is our intention to use the Sleepers as shock troops in our coming conflict with the two newly discovered alien species. Any questions?
Do I have time to make a will before I go?
The Empress laughed briefly and called forward more guards with a wave of her hand.
Escort the captain and the investigator to their new ship. See they don't get lost along the way.
Silence bowed, and he and Frost left the court with their heads held high, doing their best to ignore the dozen heavily armed guards who escorted them. Silence shook his head ruefully as he left. Not only had Lionstone presented him with a near impossible task, quite likely to get him and the investigator killed, she had also ensured that he would have no chance at all to open his mouth about the origins of the new star drive. Lionstone didn't lack for courage or cunning, which was at least partly why she was still Empress. Lionstone waited till they were gone, and then smiled out over her court.
We trust it is now clear what lengths we will go to protect the Empire? Good. We will defend the Empire from any enemy, without or within. Make no mistake, most gracious lords and ladies and gentle friends. The new star drive gives our Imperial fleet an unbeatable advantage over any who might try to stand against us. Our enemies shall fall. There will be nowhere they can hide from us, nowhere we will not follow them. Our will shall be unchallenged. Now, is there any other business?
The ceiling high above the throne exploded, and debris rained down through the shifting mists. The maids-in-waiting leapt up and sheltered the Empress's body with their own. Sharp-edged rubble cut their pale flesh, and blood flowed, but none of them flinched. The court screamed and panicked, milling this way and that in their fear and confusion. Dram drew his sword and gun and looked about him for an enemy. And out of the smoke and mists above the throne dropped a dozen long lines, down which slid men and women dressed in leathers and chains. They hit the water and stepped quickly aside to make way for others coming down after them. Dram looked at the dozen guns facing his one, and stood very still. The newcomers gestured for him to drop his gun and sword, and he did, watching expressionlessly as they disappeared into the dark waters and were gone. Kit Summerow dropped his sword without waiting to be told. The maids moved a little away from Lionstone to form a defensive circle around the throne, staring at the newcomers with unblinking insect eyes. The courtiers were all shouting and talking at once, and one word rose again and again above the rest. "Elves! The elves have found us!"
"Honor to the Esper Liberation Front!"
shouted one of the newcomers, a young woman in battered leathers and far too many chains, over a T-shirt bearing the legend, "Born to Burn." She was short and stocky, with muscles bulging on her bare arms. Her long dark hair was full of knotted ribbons, and she might have been pretty if her eyes hadn't been alight with the fire of the true fanatic. Other elves gathered around her. Half trained their guns on the quieting court, the others on the throne. Lionstone watched in silence from behind her maids, her eyes full of fury. Neither she nor Dram nor anyone in the court was foolish enough to go up against energy weapons. The Esper terrorists looked hard and roughly used, but the chains holding their leathers together were freshly polished, and they all wore bright colors on their faces and in their hair. Most of them were young, some barely out of their teens, but they all had scars somewhere on their bare skin. The Empire used Espers harshly, which was why so many died or went rogue. Most died. There were very few old Espers. The elf wearing the Born to Burn T-shirt stepped forward and bowed mockingly to the silent court.
"Sorry about the mess, but a good entrance is so important. Now be good boys and girls and do as you're told, and you'll be able to leave here with all your major organs intact and still attached in the right places. Annoy us, and we'll think of something amusing to do to you. And some of us have a really nasty sense of humor. Being an outlaw can do that to you."
She turned to look at Lionstone.
"Relax, dear. We're not here to kill you. We've come for one of our own. Now, do you want to step down from that throne, or would you rather be thrown down?"
Lionstone rose to her feet and stepped down into the dark waters with icy dignity. The maids moved immediately to surround her. The elf ignored them all and crouched down beside the throne, running her hands carefully over the black iron studded with jade.
"Do you have a name, traitor?"
"Stevie Blue. Not at all pleased to meet you."
"My guards will be here soon. There is no way you can hope to escape."
"Your guards are currently being run in circles by associates of ours. Your only protectors are those poor mind-burned souls acting as your maids, and the S-blocker built into your throne. Ah, got it!"
She slid back a recessed panel in the side of the throne and carefully removed a translucent cube the size of her head. An ESP blocker was really quite a simple device, the living brain of an Esper, removed from its body and held in suspension. A low current passed constantly through the frontal lobes, keeping the brain awake and aware and functioning, using its ESP to prevent any other Esper abilities from functioning in its vicinity. Just another hell the Empire made, and the only real defense against a rogue Esper. Or an elf. Stevie Blue lifted the cube above her head and brought it down with savage force on the arm of the throne. The fragile container shattered, and the brain tissue fell apart, already dying. The bloody tissues slipped down the side of the throne and dripped into the water.
"Be at peace, my friend. The fight goes on."
She turned her gaze on Lionstone again.
"That's one less soul living in a hell you made for them."
Lionstone smiled.
"I'll get another. There's no shortage of donors."
She broke off as the elf took a step forward, and then stopped herself. Stevie Blue looked at her coldly.
"I could kill you now, Lionstone. Any of us could. We want your death so badly, we can taste it. We dream about it at night and wake to plan new ways of taking it. One day we'll take your precious empire apart stone by stone till there's nowhere left for you to hide, and then we'll come for you. But if we were to kill you now, while you're weak and helpless, you'd just be replaced by another from your corrupt line, and the new emperor would order massive reprisals among the Esper community. Thousands would die, and thousands more would suffer. But we didn't want to leave without giving you some indication of our true feelings for you, so we brought you a little present.
She reached back, and a large cream pie was placed in her hand. Stevie Blue grinned at Lionstone's shocked expression, and then aimed and threw the pie with one easy motion. It hit Lionstone squarely in the face, and she fell back a step, clawing at the mess on her face.
You'd be justified in calling for reprisals over an assassination attempt, but over a pie in the face, you just look extremely petty, not to mention weak. Goodbye, Lionstone. It's been a pleasure.
Lionstone glared past the thick swirls of cream and pointed a quivering finger at the elves.
Kill them! Kill them all!
The maids sprang to obey. They surged forward, steel claws shooting out from under their fingernails, and the elves went to meet them, manifesting their abilities. Stevie Blue wrapped herself in fire, living flames of pure heat, but the maids jumped her anyway. They were beyond such weaknesses as pain or fear. Stevie disappeared beneath the clawing figures, and the other elves raced to help her. The maids split up to greet them. They fell upon the first two espers and tore them apart with their unnatural strength. Blood flew on the air as the elves screamed and died. One esper gestured desperately, and the maids stopped suddenly as though they'd slammed into an invisible wall. And then they stumbled forward again as the wall collapsed. Stevie Blue's flames flickered and went out. Lionstone laughed and sat upon her throne again.
You didn't really think I'd trust my safety to just the one S-blocker, did you?
She had to shout the last part over rising screams as the maids moved among the desperate elves. Disruptors fired, but the maids moved too quickly to be hit. Then they were among the elves, and it was too dangerous to use the guns anymore. The maids leapt among the espers like wolves in the fold, tearing at defenseless flesh with their clawed hands and stuffing the bloody meat into their mouths. They were hungry. One esper stuck his gun in a maid's mouth and fired it. The maid's head exploded, spraying bloody gobbets everywhere. Another maid appeared behind the esper and wrapped her arms around him in a bear hug. The esper's ribs collapsed and drove inward, piercing his heart and lungs. The remaining elves tried to run, but the maids were everywhere. The elves fell one by one, until finally only one man remained free. He ran toward the throne and tried to fire his disruptor, but the energy crystal was still recharging. He threw the useless gun aside and drew his sword. A maid jumped him and pulled him down into the water. She held him under and watched him personally as he drowned. He kicked and struggled, and then his sword thrust up out of the water and slammed into the maid's belly. The force of the blow threw her back, and the esper burst up out of the water, coughing and choking. He fixed his gaze on Lionstone again and hefted his sword. He moved forward, and the maid jumped him from behind. She concentrated in the way she'd been taught, and the shrapnel bomb set inside her body exploded. Both she and the elf were torn apart by the blast, and blood and shrapnel rained down for long moments. Quiet fell slowly across the court. The only sound, that of the 4 surviving maids-in-waiting, feeding on the bodies of the fallen elves. Lionstone called to them, and they came, clustering around her throne with bloody hands and mouths, like hounds called away from the kill. The Empress looked down from her throne at Stevie Blue, crouching torn and bloodied in the water at the base of the throne. She'd managed to draw her sword, but her hand was trembling violently from the shock and pain of her wounds. She stumbled forward, forcing herself on, her bloody mouth set and determined. Dram stepped in behind her and ran her through with his sword. Stevie Blue fell to her knees. She whimpered, and blood ran from her mouth. Dram pulled his sword out, and she shook once, as though at a sudden chill. Lionstone stepped down from her throne to kneel before her. She had an ornate silver dagger in her hand. She leaned forward till her face was right before the espers.
Have you nothing left to say to me, elf? About how weak I am, or how clever you were? No last declaration for the cause?
Stevie shuddered again. Blood poured down her chin. When she spoke, only the Empress could hear her.
I'll be back. There are lots like me. One of us will get you. Burn in hell, bitch.
Lionstone slid the dagger delicately into Stevie's heart and breathed the Esper's dying exhalation into her own mouth, savoring it like a connoisseur. She pulled out the dagger, put her fingertips against the Esper's breast, and pushed. Stevie Blue fell back into the dark water and lay still. Lionstone straightened up, made the dagger disappear up her sleeve again, and allowed Dram to help her up onto the throne again.
Elves never talk. They program their minds to self-destruct rather than give up any secrets. If anything, you gave her an easy death.
You always want to spoil my fun, Dram. She died in despair. That will do for me. For the moment, I'm more interested in how that many elves got past your security defenses.
A good question, and one which I will be putting to my staff very forcefully once this audience is over. I can only assume I have a traitor somewhere in my organization.
I thought that was supposed to be impossible.
So did I. If there is a traitor, I'll find him.
I hope so, Dram. Because if I can't trust you to protect me, what use are you?
Dram smiled and carefully dipped a finger into the traces of cream still on her face. He tasted it thoughtfully.
Brandy butter sauce, my favorite. If nothing else, the elves do have excellent taste.
Of course. Just ask my maids.
Owen lurched forward. He didn't know who she was or what she wanted with him, and he didn't care. A moment before he'd been ready to die, but now he'd found hope again, and he wanted to live. He could recognize destiny when it came calling. He could take a hint. He stumbled up the ramp, leaving a bloody trail behind him, and she yanked it up the moment he was clear and slammed the hatch shut. There were 2 sets of crash webbing just inside, and Owen sank gratefully into one as the woman threw herself into the other and jabbed frantically at the control panels. The ship lurched under him, engines roared, then they were up and off and moving. Owen let the webbing support him and studied his rescuer thoughtfully. The most obvious guess was that she wanted the reward on his head and didn't feel like sharing, but somehow he didn't think so. He supposed he should cautiously draw her out with clever questions and gradually determine what she wanted with him, but he didn't have the strength or the patience. So, when all else fails, be direct. I'm Owen Deathstalker. Who are you? And why did you help me? His voice sounded weak and thin to him, but if his rescuer noticed, it didn't show in her answer.
I'm Hazel Dark. How I got here is rather complicated. I rescued you because I didn't like the odds you were facing. I've always had a soft spot for the underdog. What did you do to get so many people mad at you?
I've been outlawed. There's a very attractive price on my head if you think you can take it.
Relax, stud. I'm an outlaw, too. No way I could collect your price without getting topped myself. There's a lot of us about these days, but then that's the iron bitch for you. Deathstalker. That name rings a bell.
I should hope so. I used to be lord of this planet.
I'm impressed. I don't normally move in such high circles. Look, you got any ideas where I should point this tub? There are 5 ships right behind us and closing fast. I feel I should also point out this is a ship's escape pod and my power cells are almost dead, so don't start getting ambitious. We've got maybe 40 minutes of flight left, assuming I don't have to divert power to the energy shields.
Owen hesitated. You still haven't explained why you risked your ship and yourself to rescue me.
Underdogs have to learn to look out for each other because no one else will. An outlaw needs all the friends he can get. You'll learn that if you survive this mess. Life as an outlaw can be very enlightening.
All right. Head due north. There should be a large lake about 10 miles from here, unless I'm even more lost than I thought I was. Tell me when we get there. He lay back in the crash webbing and fought to clear his thoughts. He had an ally now, and a second chance at escape. If she could just get him to the Sunstrider, he might yet live to get his revenge after all. The thought stirred new strength in him, and he took a second look at his surroundings. Apart from the crash webbing, the control panels, and the bulkheads, there wasn't much to look at. It was all pretty minimalist, but it seemed solid enough. Presumably, there wasn't much point in wasting frills and fancies on an escape pod.
It's been a long time since I traveled in anything this primitive. What does it run on, steam?
Any more smart remarks like that and you can get out and push. Don't knock this tub, it's saving your ass and mine. Okay, forward sensors report a large body of water dead ahead. Rear sensors report a whole mess of people coming after us and everything that flies. You'd better have a plan to get us out of this Death Stalker because I am fast running out of options.
Relax. I have an ace up my sleeve, and it's a beauty. In fact, she's waiting for us at the bottom of that lake. Hazel looked across at him sharply.
Wait a minute. We're going diving?
You got it. My private yacht is sitting in its own little niche right at the bottom, hidden from everything but heavy-duty sensors. No one knows it's there but me. Had a feeling it might come in handy someday. Paranoia doesn't just run in my family, it gallops. Part of the territory that comes with being a lord. Drop this thing in the lake and head straight down. I'll contact the yacht, lower her shields, and start powering her up. Your sensors will pick up the Sunstrider once you get close enough. Slip in next to her and fasten onto the outer airlock. She's special, my Sunstrider. Has all the power and facilities we'll need to make our escape, and then some. Once we're up and moving, nothing's going to catch us. Got her own hyperdrive based on a new, more powerful design that was only recently discovered. Only a dozen ships fitted with it so far, and none of them anywhere near here. Cost a fortune, but I've always believed in going for the best. Take us down, please. Hazel shook her head, smiling.
How the other 3% lives. Going down, Deathstalker. You better be right about this.
Trust me. Have I ever lied to you?
How would I know?
Owen laughed quietly as Hazel sent the escape pod plunging beneath the waters of the lake. Hazel watched the sensor panels carefully as the pod sank slowly through the dark waters, and then she leaned forward suddenly. Huge forms were rising up out of the depths toward the craft. They were hundreds of feet long, and according to the sensors, very much alive. They reached the escape pod in seconds and circled around it, moving unsettlingly quickly for things so large. Hazel's hands itched for some kind of weapon, but the beasts didn't seem to be attacking the craft or even warning it off. In fact, if she hadn't known better, she would have sworn they were escorting the ship down. A thought occurred to her, and she looked across at Owen.
According to the sensors, we've picked up an escort. Whatever they are, they're disturbingly large and quite definitely alive. Would you know anything about this?
He smiled tiredly. They're behemoths from Virimon's oceans. I had the lake seeded with a breeding pair to discourage people from using the lake. I didn't want any diving teams stumbling over my hidden ship. I understand fishing along the shores of the lake has become regarded as a danger sport. The locals play it up as a tourist attraction. I should have applied for a percentage. Hazel looked at him dubiously.
Then why aren't these things attacking us?
Because they're actually relatively harmless. They're big and ugly and have teeth like knives, but they're timid as hell. Say boo to them and they'd run a mile. Of course I don't tell anyone that. There's nothing to worry about. They're probably just curious about us. Ignore them. Hazel looked as though she was about to say something cutting, so it was probably just as well that a flashing light on the sensor panels caught her attention. They'd found Owen's yacht. She eased the escape pod into position above it, and then let the onboard computer oversee contact with the yacht's outer airlock. The behemoths circled hopefully above them for a few moments, and then disappeared back into the dark waters. For a while, Owen and Hazel just lay back in their crash webbings, gathering their strength. They'd used up most of their reserves to get this far, and both of them felt like they'd been running on empty for some time. A bone-deep weariness held them in the webbing like iron weights. It was tempting just to lie there and escape the stress and strain of their situation in dreamless sleep. Owen slowly realized that if he didn't move soon, he'd just lie there until he bled to death. He forced himself up and out of the webbing, then roused Hazel from hers with harsh words and the promise of luxurious quarters inside the yacht. It took her a while to open the airlock with her burned hands, refusing his offer of help, and then she stepped back for Owen to lead the way. He grinned sardonically and stumbled toward the yacht's outer airlock on unsteady feet. He entered the correct security code, and the lock swung open. Owen stepped through, Hazel close behind. Lights turned themselves on as the ship sensed their presence, and Hazel stopped just beyond the inner airlock and gawped openly at the sheer opulence before her. Every form of convenience and luxury had been catered for in the ship's fittings, everything from rich furs on the floor to the very latest computer hardware. There was even an old-fashioned bar, all gleaming mahogany and cut-glass decanters. Owen grinned briefly at her reaction and waved her into the nearest leather-upholstered chair.
She is a little beauty, isn't she? 150 feet long, 30 wide, with a reinforced gold-plated hull, and all the extras I could find in the catalog. Get your breath back while I find out if we've still got an AI to run things.
He accessed the ship's computers through his comm implant, contacted the standings computers, and downloaded Ozymandias into the ship's mainframe. It all took less than a second, and he broke contact as quickly as he could, just in case something was lying in wait to follow him back. And then the AI's comforting voice was with him again, and he relaxed a little.
Owen, dear boy, don't ever leave it that late again. Still, I'm relieved to see you survived this far. I'm afraid your standing is completely overrun and somewhat vandalized. The Imperial Codebreakers are currently trying to crack an empty shell I set up as a distraction, and probably will be for some time. But I think it would be in both our interests to get the hell off this planet as quickly as possible, if not faster. We have definitely overstayed our welcome, and it's well past time we were gone. I see you've acquired a new friend. Aren't you going to introduce us?
Hazel Dark, Owen sub-vocalized briskly. She's an outlaw like me. Give her low-level security clearance for the time being.
Very well, Owen. With your permission, I'll start running the ship through some wake-up routines and get it ready to depart.
Yeah, you do that. And keep the long-range sensors alert. If there's anything moving anywhere near this lake, I want to know about it.
Hey, Deathstalker. This is some ship you've got here.
Owen turned his attention back to Hazel. She was slumped in the oversized chair with a large drink in her hand, like a rag doll that had been left too close to the fire.
I could buy a dukedom for what this must have cost. The last time I saw luxury like this was in a top-ranked brothel parlor back on Loki.
Owen winced, but managed a polite smile. I'm so glad you approve. Right now, I suggest we move into the next room. There's a certain little device there that will do us both a power of good. Hazel looked at him suspiciously.
This wouldn't involve a bed, would it?
Thanks for the interest, but no, I don't think either of us are in any condition for that. Please, step this way. Hazel emptied her glass, let it drop onto the carpet, and struggled up out of her chair. Owen knew better than to offer her any help. It took her a while, but eventually she was back on her feet and swaying only slightly. In the sharp, unforgiving light of the yacht's main quarters, she looked worse than ever. Her clothes were scorched and tattered, and her burns were deep and disfiguring. Her hands were charred claws. He offered her his arm, and she took it as though she was doing him a favor. He led the way into the next compartment, a small, compact room dominated by a long steel cylinder, 8 feet long and 3 wide. Hazel studied it warily. It looked disturbingly like a body bank.
All right. I'll bite. What is it?
Cell regenerator. Promotes rapid healing in minor injuries, and major ones too, if you've got the time to spare. Works on the same principles used for cloning human tissues. Strictly forbidden for any but those of noble birth on pain of a very unpleasant death. Still, I won't tell anyone if you won't. You want to go first?
After you.
Owen grinned. He activated the necessary systems through his implant, and the cylinder split apart, revealing a surprisingly comfortable-looking interior. Owen climbed in, gave Hazel a reassuring smile, and lay back with a sigh as the cylinder closed itself over him. After that, it got very still and very quiet. Hazel looked about her. She had to keep fighting down an urge to sneak back into the other room, pick out the smaller valuable items, and stuff them into her pockets. She had a strong feeling that would be a bad idea. Partly because it would have been a betrayal of Owen's trust, but mainly because she had an extremely strong feeling that she was being watched. She leaned against the cylinder to steady herself and raised her voice.
Is there an AI on board this yacht?
Yes, miss,
said the AI through an overhead speaker.
I am Ozymandias at your service. How may I help you?
Tell me about Owen Deathstalker.
Head of the Deathstalker clan and Lord of Virimond until his outlawing. A good man within his limitations. You can trust him to do what he feels is right.
That's rather vague.
That's Owen for you. He's never been a very positive person. Something of an underachiever, in fact. I've hopes the current emergency will bring out the best in him, if he doesn't get horribly killed first.
Hazel was about to say something rather cutting when the cylinder suddenly started to open, and she had to stand up quickly to avoid being thrown off. The sudden movement made her feel giddy for a moment, but she had it back under control before Owen could notice. He stood before her and struck a jaunty pose, and she had to admit he was looking a hell of a lot better. His injuries had healed with no trace of scars, and he had a new confidence in his bearing. Even his clothes had been cleaned and repaired. He smiled cheerfully at her reaction. "I told you, this yacht has everything you can think of, and a few things you never dreamed of. Climb in, and the machine will take care of you, too." Hazel wasn't at all sure she liked the way he'd put that, but she didn't really have any choice, and she knew it. The shock that had protected her from the worst of her burns had worn off long ago. Every movement was agony now, and she was hovering on the edge of total exhaustion. She couldn't argue anymore, and anyway, sooner or later she was going to have to trust the Deathstalker, even if he was a lord. She nodded stiffly to Owen and stepped clumsily into the cylinder. She lay down and gave herself up to fate with something like relief. She shut her eyes as the cylinder closed over her.
Do you want me to make any changes in the young lady?
Owen frowned. How do you mean changes?
Well, there are several programs I can run while she's in the cylinder that would make her more tractable. Programs to make her loyal to you, for example, and prevent her from raising any weapon against you. They're quite safe and will do her no lasting damage. It's simply a matter of security, Owen. She is an outlaw, after all.
So am I. You leave her mind alone. That's an order.
Yes, Owen, as you wish.
Owen wasn't sure why he was so angry. The computer was programmed to look after his best interests. It was just doing its job. But Hazel had risked her life to save his, for no profit that he could see. No one had ever done that for him before, who didn't have to, and he wasn't sure yet how he felt about that. Until he was sure, Hazel Dark was under his protection, even from himself if necessary. Anything new on the sensors?
Nothing so far. Your plunging into a lake has confused the hell out of them. I'm picking up all kinds of unprotected transmissions. Some think it was desperation, others are suggesting suicide. Right now they're arguing about whether to wait for you to re-emerge or go in after you.
Let me know when they make up their minds. Owen stretched slowly. The cylinder had repaired all his physical hurts, but he was still mentally exhausted. I still can't believe everything fell apart so fast. I seem to have gone through the only experience left for the man who has everything, losing it all. This has to be some kind of ghastly mistake. I've done nothing to be outlawed for.
Perhaps if you were to surrender yourself and offer to hand over Miss Dark as a sign of good faith...
No, I don't want to hear that kind of idea from you again. Besides, I already thought of that, and it wouldn't work. They'd just take her and kill me anyway. Is the ship ready to go yet?
Yes, Owen, ready for takeoff.
The cylinder opened, and Hazel emerged like a rather bedraggled butterfly from its cocoon. Her overalls had been repaired and looked cleaner than Owen would have thought possible. She allowed Owen to help her out, studying her now flawless skin with awe.
I know people who would pay a medium-sized fortune for access to something like this.
If we find ourselves dangerously short of money, perhaps you can set up a deal. Now, if you'd like to join me in the main compartment, I think it's time we get the hell out of here. Once we're up and moving, there's nothing on this planet that can catch us. Oz, take us up, and don't stop for anything till we're in orbit.
Yes, Owen.
Then where?
Hazel followed Owen back into the first compartment. He shrugged. I was hoping you'd have some ideas. I'm new to the outlaw business. Where can we go where we'll be safe from the kind of people who'll be coming after me? And before you say anything, no, I am not interested in joining up with any rebel groups against the Empire. I am still loyal to the Iron Throne and the Empire, if not the Empress.
Nicely rationalized.
There's only one place we can go, Mistworld, the rebel planet. But it's a one-way trip. You'll be safe enough there, but no one ever leaves Mistworld.
Mistworld. I might have known. Hazel looked at Owen inquiringly, and he shook his head. Don't ask. Very well. For want of anywhere better to go, Mistworld it is. Set the coordinates, Oz. Let me know when we're ready to make the hyperjump.
Yes, Owen. We are now in orbit.
What, already? I didn't even know we'd taken off.
I told you this yacht was special. Oz, show us what's happening on the main view screen. One of the walls became a view screen, showing Virimond far below, and an Imperial Star Cruiser heading straight for them. Even as they watched, a second Star Cruiser dropped out of hyperspace behind the first.
2 Star Cruisers? They sent 2 bloody Star Cruisers to get me? Cut me some slack, damn it!
There is a possibility this might have something to do with me. My previous ship rammed a Star Cruiser just after I got away in the escape pod. Presumably, they got a distress call out as they went down.
Thanks a whole bunch. Any other nasty little surprises you've been keeping from me? No, tell me later. Oz, shields up and go hyper the moment the power levels are steady. I don't know why they're not firing already.
Presumably, they're being extra cautious after already losing one ship. It's not something that happens all that often. They're trying to contact us. Should I talk to them?
It couldn't hurt. Lie a lot.
There's no way this ship can stand up to that kind of firepower, and there's no way we can get out of here before they open fire.
Not necessarily. This ship has a new kind of hyperdrive. Very powerful, very fast.
Why do I get this strong feeling that there's a butt hanging on the end of that?
But it's rather untested. No one's had a chance to use it much yet, and there's always the chance they haven't got all the bugs out. I always intended to take her on a long shakedown run, but what with one thing and another, I never found the time. And then circumstances rather caught up with me.
Great. Just great. If I had anything left in my stomach, I think I'd be sick.
All systems are ready, Owen, or as ready as they're ever going to be. Power's up and all tests are positive. I'm lying my head off to both Star Cruisers, but I don't think they're in a listening mood. Both are now in firing range. It's time to go, Owen. There's nothing left to hold us here.
The view screen filled with light as both Star Cruisers opened fire on the Sunstrider. Owen and Hazel winced instinctively. Take us out of here, Oz. We're going to Mistworld.
And the good God grant us luck, because we're going to need it.
The Sunstrider dropped into hyperspace and was gone. And the Star Cruisers were left to orbit Virimond alone.